It's like, I don't know, this thing that I've developed. I can't even explain it. Jason was skinny and tall. He sat on the couch in my office, his eyes sunken in, bags beneath him hanging like rotted fruit. I was sitting behind my desk in a swivel chair, a clipboard on my knee with a sheet of notes on top, a pen in hand posed to write. I was relaxed and calm, mainly because Jason reminded me much like my previous patients, nervous, a bit paranoid or depressed, just like the ones that I had cured before. I was confident that if Jason were like any of those patients, that he would be cured as well. All it took was a little bit of time and commitment. To me, Jason was just another patient in my long line of successes and accomplishments. Could you try to explain it? I asked. I'd sound crazy, he replied, rubbing his neck. I smiled at him, and he caught the drift. How many crazy people have told you that they can see things before they happen, that they can see the future? He asked, his head bent toward the ground, his hands rubbing up and down on his forearm and legs. I shifted in my seat, watching him, waiting for something else, but there was nothing. I'd heard many stories, delusions, fantasies, and much like this one, I knew, I was sure, confident, that it was all fake. I've seen clients who suffer from disorders that can cause them to have those beliefs. I remember one client who had the belief that there were little fairies in his house that had disguised themselves as spoons. I replied calmly, adding in the example at the end to lighten the mood. But my example had no effect on him. Jason looked up at me, and he had the look in his eye, the one I'd seen in all my patients, that he was convinced his ability was not only incurable, but completely and totally real. Have you ever cured them? He asked. Every client of mine has ended up in a much better place than they had been, I replied. Jason chuckled. I'm not talking about your clients. I'm talking about their delusions, their fantasies, Jason said, and I stared at him, my light smile gone. Have you ever cured them? Well, if they are better off than they were, that would either mean the delusion is gone or at least kept at bay. Medications help with such things, as does therapy, I replied calmly and motioned at my office. Jason was quiet. Not for me it doesn't, he muttered. Medications? Yes, and therapy. Have you tried other medications and other therapy before? I had my pen ready to write. Many meds and many therapists, just like you, as well, and so far, no good, he replied. With one hand, I checked the paper on my desk at his background. Inside, it was a list of all his medical background and therapy and medication. And there was none. He'd had no trouble until this first appointment with me. His claim of no medical and therapeutic help was another fantasy and delusion, but for now I could go along with it, to see if Jason would open up more toward our session. Did your previous therapists claim this as well? That these medications didn't work? I asked. Of course they did. I see. What? I was just saying, I understand. Okay. I wrote some more down on my paper. So tell me about this power. You said you can see things before they happen? I said, turning the subject back to Jason. He straightened up in his chair, his posture standing taller, flattening out his shirt and fixing his hair, as if he was about to give a very important lecture. It started a couple months ago. I had a dream, and in the dream, I saw a mug fall from a table in a kitchen. The mug shattered and blood washed out of it, mixing in along with the shattered glass. I woke up in a sweat, but thinking nothing of it. Then, a couple days later, I'm in the kitchen, and my mom is washing dishes, and she sets a wet mug on the table counter. I remember my dream, but by the time I do, the mug falls, shattering on the floor. My mom hears this and sees the mess and goes to pick up the shards, and then she cuts an artery on her hand. The blood mixes with the shattered pieces. She almost bled to death before we could get her to the hospital." I wrote all of this down as he went, only sure to highlight the main points and plots of the story. I make a note to discuss this with his mother before they leave after the session, just to make sure if his story is accurate in its telling. "What you're saying is that your dream predicted what happened that day? The day of the accident?" I clarified. "Not just this dream. Many of them." "Hmm? What? You've had multiple dreams where events have been predicted?" Jason nodded. "Do you want me to tell another dream?" Jason asked. "It's entirely up to you, Jason," I replied. "Do you?" I looked at him. "This is your time. You can choose whatever you wish to talk about," I explained. "I know, I'm not stupid," he replied. "I know you aren't. How?" I looked at him and he shrugged his shoulders. "You don't believe me," Jason said. "I never said that," I assured him. "I can tell." I nodded. "I'll tell another," he decided. "Okay," I said. Jason squinted at me and rubbed his hands on his pants and started to talk again. "In this other dream, I'm inside a garage somewhere, and there's a chair in the center of the garage, and it is all surrounded by this lawn equipment. In the chair, there is someone sitting, and it looks as if it's a child. I try to move the chair, but I find I can't move at all, and I see that in the figure's hand, there is a shotgun, and I watch as the figure slowly puts the shotgun up to the chin and pulls the trigger, and brains and blood shatter up against the ceiling and all over me as well. Then, I wake up," he said quietly, saying nothing else. A sudden sense of anxiety started to flow over me, and I felt clammy and unkempt. Waves of heat washed over me, and I'd started to feel sick. There was something in the room that was warming up, building up. An urge to stand and leave overcame me for a second. I considered taking the trip to the restroom to get myself together, although I decided against it entirely. I became anxious to finish the therapy session and to get on with my day. "That sounds very serious, Jason," is all I managed to say, and I wrote the dream down as much as I could remember. "Do you have a wife?" Jason asked. I stopped and looked up at him. "What's that?" I asked, but I heard him the first time. "You have a wife," Jason repeated, and he nodded to my finger, a gold ring enclosed around. "I do," I replied. "A child?" "A son. He's 8. "That's good." Jason smiles, and I took a deep breath and relaxed. I was unaware of how tense I'd become under all his questioning. I started to think that this might be more serious than I previously thought. That was when I remembered that I hadn't finished with Jason's second dream. "So, what happened?" I asked. "What do you mean?" I poised the pen at him. "The child in your dream. He died by gunshot, from what I'm interpreting," I specified. Jason smiled at me. "Go on," he said. It was as if he were the therapist now, and I the patient. "Did anything happen, Jason?" I asked quietly. He looked at me and leaned forward toward me, with his palms on his knees, like he might be sick. "A couple days later, a friend of mine, this girl, is all upset and crying. She hadn't been to school in a few days. I'm her friend, so I ask her what's going on, and that's when she tells me that a younger brother had died in some sort of accident. I pressed on, and she says that he died because he'd gotten his dad's gun out of the closet and fiddled with it, and had shot himself by accident." I listened to his story, and it took me a moment to write all of it down. The thought that maybe Jason was right about the condition, and that it was real, passed by me, but I shook it away as soon as it came. No one can see the future, let alone in their dreams. But the way Jason looked at me, the way he told his dreams in that dull, emotionless, monotone, and yet vividness, how real it sounded. I shook my head again. Then it also occurred to me that Jason could be lying about all of this. There had to be a reason why, though. There was no other explanation except the impossible. "Jason, can I ask you a question?" I asked. "You just did," he replied. I smiled wanly, but I didn't feel confident. I still had that awful dread that there was some power he had over me, a power I couldn't quite see. Jason smiled at me, and then he said, "I'm joking. Go ahead." It was as if I was waiting for his permission. "Are you lying to me about these dreams that happen in real life?" Jason's face darkened, and then it went away, and he smiled at me and chuckled. "I wouldn't be here if I wanted to lie," Jason said. "I know. I just had to ask you because I'm certain you know that all of this, and what you've told me, sounds pretty unbelievable, does it not? All of the dreams predicting the future. Things like this don't happen in real life, Jason. It's impossible," I said. He stared at me, studying me. "You don't believe me," he whispered. I took a deep breath. "I just want you to be honest," I replied. "What if I told you that I am being honest, that all these things did really happen? Would you call me crazy? Would you think of me as the rest?" he asked. "Of course not. What do you mean by the rest?" Jason was quiet. "What would you call me?" he asked again. "I wouldn't call you anything," I said. "Really?" "Yes." He looked at me and smiled, and then leaned back in the office couch. He kept looking at me. "When I was young, I used to have nightmares. Did you know that?" he asked. I began to write. "No, I didn't," I replied. "What I have aren't nightmares. They're real, and they happen. This fabric of reality around you and I in this room is the only thing that keeps us here together, yet separate at the same time. Only the dreams I have are able to break that reality. If only you could see these dreams, to experience it. Would your reality break?" Jason said, and he stared at me still, his eyes emotionless, blank. A sense of dread began to fill me like nothing had ever before, as if a bucket of warm, brown blood had been poised over my head and poured inside me, filling up my arms and legs and eyes and head. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "I don't know. What am I saying, Doctor?" I stared at him. Jason sighed. "The only way you would be able to understand what my dreams are like is if you experienced it yourself, or if you were part of it somehow. You're still in denial. You think I'm lying, that all these dreams don't exist. That's the fabric of this reality, your unwillingness to believe," Jason said. "You're saying I'm the one who is delusional, and that the only way to break it is to understand and experience your dreams?" I asked. He pointed at me. "Precisely," he said. "Well, I'm afraid that's impossible," I added. "How so?" "I can't experience the dreams you have. But I've told you them. You just have to believe. I'm a therapist, not a dream interpreter." And then he leaned forward, and he looked over at my desk. He studied the pictures I had sitting there, a dozen or so, all neatly placed. I had them there like any man with an office would. I was a good man. I never did anything wrong. "That's your family," Jason said, nodding at the pictures. I glanced back at the pictures, my sense of dread still tingling. "It is," I replied. "Your wife and your boy?" "Correct. You said he was 8, turning 9 next week. What's his name?" I paused for a moment. "Braden," I lied. It was the only lie I told him throughout the session. Jason laughed as if he knew, and then he quieted again, as if there was something else on his mind he wanted to tell me. This was only our first session, but I felt like I could point out every small detail about him, even though I barely knew him. Maybe that scared me, and maybe that didn't. Maybe I saw what was coming and knew what was going to happen, and I let it. Maybe. Sometimes I just don't know. That's a nice name, Jason replied. We thought so, I added. You love him, don't you, Brayden? And your wife, of course, Jason said. A flash of anger rose up in me, making me think he had done something to harm them, but it went away. I wasn't being rational. Something was happening. What's that supposed to mean? I asked softly. I had one more dream, Doctor. Just one. Jason raised his voice up above mine, and he leaned forward off the couch, but enough to stay seated. I looked at him, and he looked back. Care to tell me? I asked. I put my pen and paper down and leaned forward, waiting. Jason smiled. I'm inside a car on the highway. I'm sitting in the back of the car, and I can only look ahead of me and not to the sides or back. It is very quiet, and I can't tell if it's light or dark outside. It's hard to tell. But from what I can see ahead of me is a young boy in a car seat, sitting down in his booster chair, and ahead of him is a young woman, who I can only assume is his mother. I watch the both of them as they wait in this car. And then, out of nowhere, I hear a sort of screeching, and I black in and out, and then I'm on the ground outside on the road. I look to the side finally, and see a shredded car with broken glass all over the place, and all across it I can see blood and other types of matter I care not to describe. I see this, and then I hear the screeching of the mother, like a siren, like the sounds you'd hear when no God existed. My heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I wake up. He finished abruptly. He stared at me, and his mouth turned into a frown as he watched me closely. I think the boy got hurt. Really bad, he said. You didn't see them in your dream? I asked. He shook his head. I should have seen it coming. Maybe I did. When was this dream? I asked. Jason rubbed his hands and swallowed. I told you, a couple days ago, he said. I looked at my watch and saw that it's almost 8 o'clock in the morning. My wife and son should have been headed to school by then, so she could drop him off. I thought for a moment that maybe my son would have a good day at school and my wife a good day at work. I imagined that when I got home later that night, I'd kiss them and hold them and love them and cherish them. Then those thoughts went away, and I remembered Jason's dream, his nightmare, his vision. My phone started to ring, and I took it out of my pocket, and it was my wife. I thought that maybe it was a good thing that she was calling, that she was going to wish me a good day at work, and that I would say the same to her, that everything would be fine, that maybe I still had a chance, that nothing had ever happened. I let it ring, not answering. Jason stared at me, and I looked up, staring back. And the phone rang, and rang, and rang, and rang. I was fine with the indignities of old age and the dull routines of the nursing home. Until everything changed. The doctor did not don a black cap first, but he might as well have. He told me that the cancer had spread and was now in my spine. Then he handed down the verdict. A week, give or take. I was only half listening as he talked about how the medication available would help control the pain. My mind was already elsewhere. I was getting out of a car. The landscape was flat, bleak. The heat was cruel and my mouth was dry. I could taste the dust carried on the desert wind and raised my hand to try and block out the blinding sun. Dusk was less than an hour away, but the light was still painfully fierce. I squinted at 3 men gathered around a camera and a tripod nearby. wondered how it would be possible to film anything in these conditions, then wandered over to say hello. I'd been a cameraman for 5 years by that point in my life. It was a career I'd stumbled into in the army when I was attached to a film unit. I was a grunt. I knew which end of the gun was dangerous and could carry equipment all day long. Then, while the unit was filming a wrecker in a village, the Viet Cong attacked. Seconds in, the cameraman was decapitated, his legs crumpled, and what was left behind fell to the ground. I knew the camera was expensive kit, so I grabbed it and tried to find the dead man's dog tag. But there was no sign, and I scrambled to cover. Later that same day, the unit set off on another assignment, and the mere fact I still had the camera made me its new operator. The director shouted at me as if I knew what I was doing, and before long, I sort of did. It turned out I had an aptitude for using a camera. This gig lasted for 18 months, and when I went home, I was hooked on filmmaking. The director went on to shoot a few made-for-TV movies and one feature, and never returned my calls. But I managed to scrape together enough work to make a living. It was a hobo kind of experience, always on the move, always hustling, and when a job came along, usually working long hours in garbage conditions. That's show business. I introduced myself to the crew that evening. I was looking forward to a 4-week shoot that began at dawn the next day. A set had been built, a high street that could have run through any small town from my view of it in the now failing light. Apart from that, I knew nothing about the movie, and that was fine by me, as long as they paid me and I got to work a camera. The rest of the crew was staying in a flophouse 50 miles away. I'd chosen to sleep in my car to save money, and from the way the sound guy itched at the angry red marks on his arms, I figured I'd chosen wisely. There were no bedbugs on my back seat. I said goodnight and watched them drive away, then settled down, wrapping the thick woolen blanket I'd brought with me around my shoulders. I hoped my dreams would not be populated by headless soldiers, but that was probably wishful thinking. I had not been asleep for long when I was woken by the sound of voices. I looked out of the car window and was surprised to see a dozen or so people heading in the direction of the set. Night had fallen, but stars filled the sky, and I could see that they looked relaxed. Some were chatting, some smoked, one was drinking from a flask. She finished and handed the flask to a man walking next to her. She flashed him a dazzling smile as she did so, and my temperature rose a good few degrees. She was beautiful. I clambered out of the car, totally at a loss as to what was going on and desperate to know her name. I stood there trying to rub an ache out of my neck and wondered what the best thing to do was. This was decades before mobile phones took over the world, and I had no way to contact the producers. There was no on-site security out here in the middle of nowhere. I guess no one thought there was any need. The camera had been left on its tripod, the sound equipment lying on the ground. As the newcomers paused next to these, I wondered if they had come to steal the kit, and was wondering if I should try and stop them or get the hell out of there, when the beautiful woman chanced to look around and saw me. She smiled at me. Wow. My legs turned to jelly, and neither fighting or fleeing felt like an option then. So I grinned like an idiot and waved. She wandered over. If I had been a screenwriter, I might have used words like swayed or sashayed to describe the way she moved. I definitely would have come up with a better opening line for myself than, "What are you? I mean, who are you?" But that's what came tumbling out of my mouth. Ex-soldiers can still blush furiously, I assure you. I was at that moment in time. She hit me with a smile and said, "I'm the leading lady on this motion picture. Who the hell are you?" I opened my mouth, but my mind was a blank, so I closed it. All of the others were heading over by this point. They still seemed very laid back and jovial, and my personal embarrassment continued to lead by a head over any kind of fear. One man stepped forward from the small crowd and held out his hand. "I am the director of this masterpiece. Are you our new cameraman?" Cogs turned slowly in my brain. "I am," I said, "but I thought we weren't starting shooting until first light." The man frowned, and then, understanding, eased out the lines on his face. "Ah," he said, "you are with the day crew." "The day crew?" I asked. "Yes, we are the night crew. Our regular cameraman is indisposed in jail, but assured me his cousin could fill in. I assumed you were him." "No, I'm sorry," I said. "A pity," he replied. "Still, perhaps we can help each other." I was aware of the woman still standing there and noticed that she was looking at me hopefully. Which is why I said, "Yes, of course." "Excellent." The director clapped his hands together. "Then let's get to it. Scene 1, take 1. The desert at night. A high street under the stars." He waved his hands at the others as if he were herding cattle, and they strolled off towards the set. The woman remained. I looked at her. I couldn't help myself. Her eyes were gentle brown. Her long black hair fell loosely over the pale skin of her shoulders. She wore a simple red dress and the faintest traces of makeup on her lips. "You will make me look good when you film me?" she asked. I answered in all seriousness, "Yeah, I promise." And then she winked and turned and sashayed and swayed. I watched her for a while, then sighed. With what was left of my common sense, I'd worked out what was going on by this point. I'd heard of, but never worked on a night shoot. They were filmed after hours, using the same set and equipment already in place for the mainstream production shooting during the day. This sliced a lot off the costs. Some of these movies were intended for foreign language markets, some were explicit and would be shown without clearance from the censor. Cast and crews were different for the day and night shoots. Usually. I carried the camera on its tripod over to the set, where everyone else was already gathered. I saw no real harm in me covering for a short while. As soon as they had a proper replacement for the cameraman, I would step aside. Going without sleep for a night or two was no big deal for me, and I was confident the quality of my work on the day shoot would not be diminished. And there was no reason the producers employing me needed to know. I rested the tripod on the dirt at one end of the fake high street and waited for the director to tell me where he wanted me to shoot from. The first scene was a long shot along the high street that ended with a woman walking into view. Next, the camera followed her as she went into the bar constructed at one end of the street. Many of these structures were just facades, less than a foot wide and propped up on the back. The bar was closer to a complete building. Old-fashioned oil lamps hung on the walls, providing the light as the woman ordered a drink and ignored the lustful look she was getting from the male actors in the bar. She was playing an outsider, and she shone in every scene we filmed. When the director called cut once more and told us that was it for the night, I felt a wave of sadness pass over me. The woman had taken a flask back out and was taking a long drink. I approached her nervous as a high school kid who'd never been on a date. "Excuse me," I said. "I was wondering if you would like to have breakfast with me." She looked around at the mucked-up buildings, the empty land beyond. "Unless you've got a dinner folded up in the boot of your jalopy," she said. "I don't think so." Then she smiled at me again, only there was a sadness in her eyes this time, and she reached out and placed a hand on my cheek. "You're sweet, but you're not for me." I wanted to protest, to say that if she got to know me, then maybe. But all I did was stand and stare. as she sashayed, swayed. It was still dark as she walked away, and the rest of the crew and cast followed. I watched until I lost sight of them, of her. I looked at my wristwatch. Dawn was still an hour away, and it would be a whole day before I saw her again. It was a day that dragged. I did not impress the director on the day shoot. It wasn't that I was tired, it's just that my concentration was shot. All I could think about was her. And by the time the day crew and cast drove off to their digs, I was pulsing with excitement. The first thing I would do, I promised myself, was ask her name. It was crazy that I did not even know that. It would be a start at least. My heart was beating way too fast as I stood and waited for night to fall, for her to appear. She was with the director this time, and a man I had not seen before. There was no sign of the others. The man was young, slim, his hair was slicked back and he had a crazy arrogance about him, and his arm was draped over a shoulder. My skin burned with jealousy. The director acknowledged me and said, "Bring the camera." I hoisted it reluctantly, the tripod's ungainly legs pressed against my side. Then I followed the three of them towards the set. One of the buildings that was more complete had a room in which a plain wooden bed had been placed. White linen sheets rippled in the breeze which entered through an open window. I was tense, felt sick as I set the camera up. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I had only just met this woman. I knew nothing about her. And yet I was in agony as the director produced 3 squat candles from his pockets and placed them about the room, lit them. In their flickering light, she lay down on the bed. I tried to meet her eye, to see if she was doing this willingly or was somehow being forced, but she did not look at me. She gazed into the young man's eyes as the director instructed, took him in her arms. He kissed her on the lips. "Film them," the director said. I snapped out of my daze. He was glaring at me. I forced myself to set the camera running and looked into it. She was a dark, lithe shape against the white sheets, and she was alone. Mystified, I glanced up. The man was moving his body against hers. I returned to the camera's view. It was not captured in its frame. "What the hell?" I muttered, and lifted my head once more to see him lingering over her neck, to see his lips open and the sharp, pale fangs reveal. With a reptile's speed, he brought them down onto her flesh. Her back arched and she began to scream. Shock held me to the spot until I felt warm breath on my own neck and turned to see the director was close enough to bite. His fangs were bared and sweat coated his skin. Fear shot through me, breaking my paralysis, and I stumbled backwards, tripping over the camera on its tripod and ended up sprawled on the floor. Where, a few hours earlier, my heart had been beating with excitement, now it raced with terror as I looked up and saw primal hunger in the director's eyes. I tried to scramble away and felt the tripod pressing into me. I realized I'd broken one of its legs. I stared at the ragged pointed edge, and memories rushed into view. In black and white and technicolor, scenes like the hideous reality in which I was caught. I remembered what the heroes did, how they escaped. I picked the tripod up, holding the broken wooden point forward, drove it into the director's chest. It was his turn to scream, an animal's howl that filled the room. Then he staggered backwards. He did not crumble into dust as the make-believe monsters had in those old movies, but dark lines had appeared in his skin. They spread rapidly, opening up like cracks, and his cries of pain intensified. I turned my makeshift weapon towards the other man. He was standing by the bed now, and hissed, once more exposing his fangs. Then he began to back away. I did not follow as he slipped to the door and disappeared into the night. I rushed to the woman. She was sprawled across the bed, blood trailed from her neck and pooled on the sheets. Her eyes stared at the ceiling and her chest rose and fell as she fought to breathe. I lifted her up and, still holding the tripod to ward off any more attacks, I ran for my car. After laying it down as gently as I could on the back seat, I started the engine and drove. I had to get us away from there. I drove through the night until the first traces of dawn began to appear on the horizon. She had been quiet till then. Only as the daylight reached the windows of the car, she gasped and thrashed around. I slammed on the brakes. I could see wisps of smoke rising from her skin, and, scrambling onto the back seat, I grabbed my blanket and covered her with it. She became still, her breathing steadier. I began to cry as I realized what she had become. "Your granddaughter is here." I look up. The memories that have gripped me tumble away. I'm back in my room at the nursing home. The care assistant says again, "Your granddaughter is here." I smile and put on my coat, and the care assistant props me up with her arm as I walk down the corridor and out into the car park, where she waits. She helps me into the car, and we set off. I tell her what the doctor has said, and that I do not want to return to the nursing home. "I want to die," I say, "out there in the desert with you." She does not reply, is focused on her driving, and I do not press her for a response. After a couple of hours' drive, we reach our favourite spot. The desert is silent, and there is nothing but the night. I drag myself slowly out of the car. She unpacks 2 seats, a projector, the screen, and sets everything up. Then we settle into our seats. "Ready?" she asks. "Yeah," I answer, and she presses a button and the projector rattles into life. Images fill the screen. The desert, a high street, stars high above illuminating, a lone woman walking into sight. It is a beginning only. The movie was never completed. I turn to her and smile, and for long moments cannot take my eyes off her. Her gentle brown eyes, her long black hair falling over the pale skin of her shoulders. She is wearing the same colour of dress as she did when we first met more than 50 years before. The same trace of lipstick. Time, for her kind, is gentler than any breeze. At first, when I aged and she did not, the charade, when we needed one, was that she was my daughter. When I moved into the nursing home 3 years ago, I introduced her to the staff as my granddaughter. I counted down the hours to her nightly visits. As the film progresses, she returns my smile. "You're missing the movie," she says, and places a hand on my cheek. There has not always been this ease between us. After the night shoot, I would not leave her, and I begged her again and again to turn me, but she told me each time that she would not inflict the torments of a new existence on me. The craving, the lust for blood, the addict's hell. She would not. Because she loved me, loves me still, as I love her. The film flickers on the screen, the final few frames. She rests her head on my shoulder. Her voice is calm when she says, "I cannot go on without you." I am not able to reply. My heart is breaking. I take a hand in mine, and we wait for the dawn. It arrives, and her grip tightens as the first rays of sun reach her skin. And then I can no longer feel her touch, and through my tears, I watch as her ashes are carried away on the desert wind. Every time I fall asleep, I have the same horrifying nightmare. A flashback of what we went through. In the dream, we're back on Zangrath again. Everything is just the way it was, and my heart aches for reasons my sleeping mind can't comprehend. My wife and I are holding hands, walking through the quiet streets downtown, window shopping and sipping coffee. And then, the ships begin to drop from the sky. Massive, skyscraper-sized towers. Their twisted holes gleam in the twin suns' glow as they appear like fingers of an unseen gargantuan god reaching down through the clouds. Screaming erupts from all around, and I squeeze my wife's hand so hard she has to slap my arm to make me realize I'm hurting her unintentionally. I release my vice-like grip, and she shakes her fingers out to regain circulation, still looking up at the sky with wide, horrified eyes. Racing back to our home, we don't think rationally. All we know is that the things dropping from the sky are terrifying, and despite the murmurs of those saying they could be coming in peace, it's hard to imagine that it's true. Peaceful diplomats do not invade in such grand numbers. They do not punch holes in the sky with ships the size of cities. My worst fears are found to be true, sooner than I thought possible, as we find out that the aliens are not peaceful. When we get home, the news shows images of death and destruction, weapons like nothing we have ever seen before. One clip shows a ray gun annihilating a crowd of innocents, their flesh sizzling and smoking first, before slowing off and revealing gleaming white bone. The large groups of people turned to skeletons who stood unmoving in the poses of living men and women for an instant, before toppling over and turning into a scattered pile of bones. The streets ran with blood, and the screams echoed through our window as we hid for as long as we could in our apartment, watching the news broadcasts with increasing despair. Bombs were dropped that turned metropolitan centers to ash. Other weapons spread disease and death through plagues and terrible viruses which spread more rapidly than I'd ever imagined possible. The invaders looked exactly like us, making it difficult to tell them apart from friendly forces. Their spies infiltrated the government and the military, making our downfall even more complete. We never found out for sure if they were disguising themselves or not. It had never occurred to anyone that if aliens did appear one day, they might look identical to humans. But they did. Even their languages sounded like ours. My nightmare always ends the same way. I wake up as I see my children's faces, blooded and lifeless, killed by creatures from another world who somehow looked just like us. They ransacked our home while they were scavenging for supplies. My son and daughter were both murdered by those monsters. Bolting upright and awake, my wife startled from her slumber as well. The nightmare again. Panting out of breath, I nodded, my skin damp with sweat and soaking the sheet beneath me. "I can't sleep either," she said, getting up. Opening the window shades, I looked out at the stars as they passed by in the distance. "I'll never get used to that view," I said with a sigh, going into the small latrine. "Hopefully we won't have to. There must be a livable planet out there somewhere. The computer will pick up something soon." Regita was always an optimist. Even after all we had been through, she kept me going. But at that moment, I didn't want to hear it. I was in a rut and wanted to feel lousy. I wanted to brood about our children and our home which was stolen from us. Instead, I went into the small kitchen area to make instant coffee for us both, trying to distract myself from melancholy with caffeine for a little while. The powdered milk was gone, and we were down to the last canister of freeze-dried coffee. I opened it up, wincing at the thought of life without the stuff. I felt like I needed it to survive these days, especially with the total lack of restful sleep I'd been experiencing lately. As I was boiling the water, an alarm began to sound. Lights started flashing on the ceiling, and a voice came over the PA system, speaking robotically. "Proximity alert. Hostile crafts detected. Proximity alert. Hostile crafts detected. Recommend evasive maneuvers." The alerts repeated again and again, and I raced towards the cockpit where my wife was already in the captain's chair. She gripped the controls tightly, and I strapped myself into the seat next to her. "It's them," was all she had to say, and I knew exactly how much trouble we were in. My heart pounding in my chest, I took the turret controls and began to take aim and fired a few shots with a meager plasma rifle we had mounted on the hull. The attacks bounced off the enemy shields like ping-pong balls. A second later, they were returning fire, and the ship rattled violently. The harness straps dug into my ribs and my shoulders as I was thrown forward in my seat, and it knocked the wind out of me as another impact came a second later, and another and another. "There's too many of them." My wife was making evasive maneuvers with sharp cuts to the left and the right, testing the ship's integrity and pushing it to its limits. She'd been a pilot in the Space Force for years. If not for her military connections and her skills of flying, we would have died back on Zangrath. I owed her my life in more ways than one. The stolen ship had been given to her by a general in a final gesture of gratitude for her dedicated years of service, as the world exploded to pieces all around us and everyone tried desperately to escape from the invaders' brutal attacks. "Take it somewhere far away from here," the general had said with his last dying breath. "Get as far away as you can." I was snapped back to the present from my reflections as the ship rattled from another brutal impact. "Leave us alone! You took our children! What more do you want from us?" My wife was screaming as she rocketed us through asteroid belts and around deadly quasars, trying to throw them off our trail. The sound of the ship's quantum engines being pushed to their utter limits made a roaring wail of noise all around us. I felt that my eardrums would pop from that horrible noise. If not from that, then surely the exploding blasts of missiles crashing off our shields would deafen me for the short remainder of my life. "We aren't going to make it," she said, looking at the displays with desperation. "I'm going to do something a little crazy here. Do you trust me?" I nodded. Of course I did. There was no one else in the universe I trusted besides her. That was when she banked sharply to the right and began to head straight for a black spot in the distance. Nothing is truly black in outer space, as you realize when you've been flying at warp speed for long enough. Every dark spot is actually a multitude of stars shining back at you, and as you draw nearer, you see them clearly. One by one, they emerge from the abyss. But this was actually pure blackness, I saw as we got closer. There was no shortcut. This was a black hole. The long death, the spaghettifying domain of a dead supermassive star. "Honey, what are you doing?" She looked at me, her eyes wide and fearful, tears beginning to well up in them. It looked like she was about to apologize for something, or she wanted to. "I never had enough time to finish my research. Remember, I had a theory about black holes, that if you fall into one, you won't be killed. Instead, you'll be transported somewhere else, far, far away." What she was saying sounded impossible. Despite my faith in her, I was terrified. Everything I had ever heard about black holes told me that we would be annihilated by it, that we would be stretched out and spaghettified by it, that time would stand still as we died a million deaths over an eternity of pain and endless suffering. "Vegeta, what if you're wrong?" She looked at me with resolve in her eyes. "We'll die either way." I was about to say that one death didn't involve being stretched out into noodles and dying over a million years in a time void with no oxygen. But it was too late. We were already getting close enough that it began to pull us in. The ship started to quake and shudder as the proximity sensors stopped blaring and new alarms began to sound instead. These ones sounded far more insistent. "They're leaving," she said. "They're not attacking us anymore. That means they know this thing will kill us." She didn't argue, just released the controls as the ship began to skid faster and faster in looping arcs towards the black hole. The warp drive was still engaged, and we sped toward it rapidly. I felt nauseated by the looping trajectory of the ship as time began to dilate, and I started to feel stretched. My body warped and aching with strange pins and needles that quickly turned into ice picks and steel rods of agonizing pain everywhere. As the darkness surrounded us, we were plunged into blackness so total I couldn't see an inch in front of me. I didn't know if I was alive or dead. The feeling of spikes being driven into my skin by sledgehammers began to abate, and was reduced to tingling and numbness. I felt nothing for a long, long time, as we seemed to float in a void for an eternity. My thoughts became an endless murmur of sounds, which meant nothing. And then, suddenly, there was light again from the blackness. How the two of us or the ship managed to stay together under such forces and such incredible duress, I will never understand, despite my wife's attempts to explain the nano self-repairing technology to me. Suffice to say, if not for the fact that we'd been gifted the most technologically advanced small scout craft in the fleet, we would not have survived. But the Pegasus took us all to the black hole, and we came out safely on the other side. We awoke, floating in a sea of stars, unfamiliar to our computer's navigation system. It struggled to recover by mapping out this new place with its sensors. Eventually, we had a rudimentary map of this galaxy we had been ejected into. A spiraling fan of stars with so many chances and places where life could spring up. "They won't be able to find us here," my wife said, gripping my hand tightly from the captain's chair. We began to search for a new planet once again. Scanning these new stars, we found 100 worlds close to being able to sustain life, but none quite capable of it. Too hot or too cold, too large or too small, no water or no signs of life. But eventually, the sensors began to emit a gentle beeping sound, far different from the harsh cries which had alerted us of approaching enemies. The robotic voice spoke over the PA once more, and the computer alerted us to a new discovery. Class 7 starfaring civilization detected. Do you wish to set a new course for this location? A few more times the message repeated before either one of us could speak. We were so shocked at what we had heard. We'd been searching for a place to set down roots, a place with vegetation and a chance to grow crops. But we'd never imagined finding a new home among others. Perhaps we could be accepted as one of their own. A newly spacefaring civilization would likely be progressive and accepting of other species. Or so we hoped. "Yes, computer, set a course for the location, please," Regita said, and I realized she had tears streaming from her eyes. "We made it," I said, sensing something was off. "Why are you crying?" "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want you to lose hope. The engine was nearly destroyed going through the rift. If we hadn't found something today, we would have been left floating out here aimlessly, lost in space forever. We would have frozen to death." We hugged as she shivered at the thought, and I did involuntarily as well. "Well, let's just be thankful we found something. Not just something. Look, a Class 7 civilization. We won't have to start from scratch, living off the land. This is a real home." "Let's hope so." By the time we arrived at the place, we could see lights illuminating the dark side of the world. Regita made for that darkened area of the planet, hoping we could land without being spotted in the night. "The landmass right here," she said in hushed tones as we approached. "They look almost the same as the ones in Zangareth." "Regita, do you see what I'm seeing? Look at all the water they have here. All that clean water. I bet they don't even have to ration." She gripped my hand tightly as the craft began to blaze at the front from the heat of entry into the atmosphere. We landed quietly and undetected in a forested area north of a large city. After hiding our ship as well as we possibly could, we began to venture on foot towards the metropolis, we call Toronto. It will take us quite a while to get there, but we're still too nervous to attempt bartering for a ride from an Earthworlder, although we have encountered quite a few. At one point, as we walked down the side of the road, heading south towards the big city, someone stopped their vehicle and rolled down the window to offer us a ride. We had been seeing signs which said Toronto 100 kilometers, Toronto 72 kilometers, Toronto 50 kilometers as we got closer. "You folks need a lift," the man said. He had a bushy red beard and short hair. wide shoulders and a thick neck. In short, he appeared quite capable of incapacitating both of us and murdering us in cold blood. Or he could have also passed for my uncle. It was impossible to tell the difference, I realized, unable to speak. My mouth was hanging open, and I backed away from the truck window, terrified for reasons I couldn't understand. The man drove off a few seconds later, as my wife was unable to suppress her horror as well. We were both somewhat surprised to find that you all looked just like us, and subsequently just like the invaders who killed our children and brutalized our planet. In fact, we're both terrified right now that you could be the latter of the two species. One of your kind left this black rectangular device on a table in a food-eating establishment, and I picked it up and began looking through it, claiming it as my own in accordance with Zangrath's finest keeper's laws. We're desperate, so we may need to sell it for sustenance. But for now, I will peruse it for more information on your kind, to learn what type of world we have landed on. I sincerely hope it's a good one. For as long as I can remember, I have lived above a clockmaker's workshop. It wasn't our workshop, although my dad did sometimes do deliveries for them as a side job of sorts. But we've rented the space upstairs for almost at least a decade now, although my parents can't tell me exactly when they moved in. Every day when I came home from school, the owner of the workshop, whose name has been lost from the clouding of my youth, was downstairs tinkering with a complex web of gears and sprockets. I didn't call him by his real name. He was simply the clockmaker to me, for reasons I'm sure you can deduce. Sometimes, before going upstairs, I would sit with the clockmaker for a while, watching him demonstrate almost inhuman precision with nothing more than an array of small metal instruments. His work was accompanied by a constant ticking. His past creations hung proudly on the walls like a father would hang pictures of his children. The clockmaker didn't have a wife nor any children despite his old age, although I always saw him as a grandpa-like figure growing up, and his warm eyes gave me the impression that he saw me the same way, a member of a family that was simply not meant to be. One time, after a particularly hard day at school, I returned home to find him in the back office, studying a large grandfather clock which seemed to loom over the cozy workspace. He seemed almost entranced by his face, a slight smile lifting his weathered features. He was so entranced that he seemed not even to notice me entering, a slight hint of confusion coming over him as he smiled down towards me. He told me a story that day, while he sketched our plans for his next contraption of intermingled amalgamation of brass webs. It was a lengthy story, and I honestly can't remember most of the specifics, but it was about a young woman he met during his youth. The impression he gave whilst reciting the story was that of a love story, but his eyes creased downwards as he recounted a tale from his lengthy life. He had met her at a train station after her hat was almost taken by a gust of wind to an unknown land distant. He managed to catch it, and after a brief conversation, they boarded the train and rode the 5-hour-long journey together. She was a university professor, travelling to give a lecture at a particularly renowned institution, although the clockmaker couldn't remember what exactly her expertise was. They talked the entire journey, with games of chess and tic-tac-toe, ensuring that boredom was kept at bay. Upon reaching the station, they both departed, and the clockmaker offered to escort the woman to a planned lecture. She accepted on the condition that he stay to listen to it. Unfortunately, a terrible accident would befall the woman, one which would leave her terribly injured, perhaps fatally so. The clockmaker apparently never learned of her fate, as she was taken to a hospital to receive the best of treatment. His eyes seemed to well up, the inevitable torrent only being stopped when I grasped his hand firmly. "It's okay. It was a long time ago. Just remember to cherish those you love. Our time in this world isn't infinite." His voice was hoarse, filled with the wisdom that an old oak tree would express if it could speak. I nodded, the ticking of the majestic wooden grandfather clock matching the beating of our hearts. I have fond memories of the clockmaker and his workshop during the early years of my youth, but the magic and protection of childhood, which allowed me to find enjoyment in every waking hour, couldn't last forever. Although I didn't mind the ticking of the clocks during the day, it always made me uncomfortable to be around them during the night, especially while I was alone. Although our space upstairs wasn't cramped, it was simply not large enough for a proper bathroom, so the only bathroom we had was downstairs, past the workshop. I always dreaded having to go to the toilet during the night, those incessant gears piercing the darkness with perfect regularity, reminding you that the march of time is insurmountable no matter how old, young, poor or rich you may be. It wasn't the darkness, nor the eerie atmosphere of the workshop during the moonlight hours, nor even the symphony of artificial order and timelessness which covered the building in an unnatural state of movement yet stillness. It was the thing that accompanied it. Perhaps thing is not the right term. Even now, with a clear, matured mind, fully comprehending it is a task simply too great for me. What I saw, what I failed to comprehend or even begin to understand, turned the workshop from a happy place, usually a carnival of unity and vibrant cohesion, into a hellscape of dark dread, which seemed to seep in from every corner. This all happened when I was around 9 years old. It was late, about 1 a.m, and I had the urge to go to the toilet. For context, the upstairs portion of this building is split into two. The stairs lead to a small landing with a single door. That door leading to a hallway connected to 3 rooms, all on the right-hand side. The first room was mine, the second my parents', and the last room was a combination of a kitchen, dining room and lounge. The door separating the hallway from the landing was thick enough to protect our ears from the constant ticking downstairs, a godsend all considering. Regardless, it was quite easy to exit my room and open the hallway door without waking my parents. Opening the door to the hallway and the stairs beyond it gave way to the consistent ticking and tocking of the chamber below. This wasn't my first time venturing downstairs in the darkness, and it wasn't an unusual occurrence. Yet, as I clambered down those rickety wooden stairs, something felt off, causing me to stop 3 steps from the bottom. I scanned the workshop, the vague outline of various clocks and timepieces singing their songs in the faint moonlight as moderate rain canvassed the door and windows. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing unusual could be garnered from the light which reflected upon my young eyes. Yet still, the thought lingered in my head, a thought of unease. "Hello?" My voice was almost silent, more of a whisper than a declaration of confidence. Of course, no answer. To tell the truth, I'm not sure what I was expecting when I called a greeting into the darkness, but still, in the moment, the urge overcame me. The only response was the rhythmic beat of the timekeeping devices around me, a familiar sound which had never caused me discomfort before. Actually, it was rather reassuring. I continued down the stairs, reaching the bottom, and once more surveying the expansive space. Nothing unusual reached my ears, nor my eyes, and I considered my moment of mild panic to simply be the result of an overactive imagination. The feeling remained, however, like an itch in the back of my head. Tick, tock, tick, tock. I moved towards the door opposite that of the front, which led to the back office. I forgot to mention, but the clockmaker does not live in the same building we do. Instead, it resides in a small cabin located at the rear of the garden to the back of the property. The bathroom was adjoined to the office and was put in some time before we moved in. I opened the door more carefully than usual, having been slightly put on edge by the now past unease I felt. My young mind imagined monsters lurking in the shadows, or perhaps an oversized spider which would gobble me whole. The small lamp hung outside over the back door gave enough illumination to allow me to maneuver my way around the office and to the bathroom door, closely avoiding a nasty accident with a shoe rack as I did so. I creaked open the door, pulled on the light, and went about my planned business. As I opened the door to leave the bathroom, a cold draft washed over my small frame. The room was no longer illuminated, and a peculiar stillness seemed to hang in the air. It took me a moment of concentrated thinking to notice. Silence. Complete silence. No tick-tocking, no marching of time, not even the pitter-patter of rain upon the windows. Pure, complete, enveloping silence. The unending tsunami of dread which crashed against my tiny mind cannot be described in mere words. A bustling market filled with energetic salesmen and curious buyers one minute, completely silent the next. Unnatural, unimaginable, implying that an event so great has occurred that an epicenter of emotion, activity and atmosphere has been overwhelmed and replaced with a husk of its former self. The office remained the same, at least from what I could tell in the newly inky darkness that surrounded me. The stack of papers, plans and schematics remained in place, awaiting for further refinement and analysis. The rack of shoes eagerly stood at attention for the moment of impromptu adventure, when their owners would put them on in a flurry of excitement to experience something new and wonderful. The old fatherly grandfather clock, watching over, much like... No, that was not right. My eyes remained locked with the looming greatness which had watched over the cramped office since the dawn of time. It seemed to observe me as well, but not with the same dread that had crept up through my very being. It watched with indifference, as if I was another stack of paper or a shoe lying helplessly on the floor. But it was silent. Everything was silent. Why was everything silent? There were dozens of clocks. How did the rain stop? Who? I took a deep breath in. The shock had slightly dissipated. Maybe the clockmaker came in whilst I was in the bathroom to turn them off. Or maybe... My young mind could not come up with any solutions I deemed reasonable or logical, but one thing was certain. I didn't want to be there a moment longer. With long strides, I walked with purpose towards the door that led to the workshop, gripping the doorknob as I took my final step. I opened it, and without really thinking, I walked through into the workshop. Only, it wasn't the workshop. It was the office again. I looked behind me to find the bathroom door closed behind me. I rubbed my eyes. Was this a dream? Maybe I was sleepwalking or still half asleep. Without stopping to study my surroundings beyond my first impression, that impression being that I was still in the office, I repeated my previous action and tried leaving the office to enter the workshop. As the door opened, I looked more carefully, finding the room beyond to be the workshop, exactly as I had expected it. I entered, the sound of the door closing behind me the only interruption to my heavy breathing. I blinked, and once more, I was in the office. Tears of anguish formed on my face, confusion rocking my small brain as I began to truly panic. I darted towards the door once more, flinging it open with the desperation that comes from being hunted, and bolted through the door, colliding with the officer's table as I ran inside. For a while, I simply sat, tears streaming down my face as a cacophony of nothing tortured my very soul. I sat, defeated, before the looming time-space which stood over everything else, as equally indifferent to my suffering as it was when I first left the bathroom. I scrunched up into a small ball leaning myself against the clock for back support, when I heard it. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was as faint as a whisper, yet the lack of any other sounds made it clear as day. I turned, looking up and into the clock's face as it stared straight back, its hands reading 1:24. The ticking had emanated from deep within the clock's structure, deeper than should have been possible. Unlike most grandfather clocks, the pendulum was not visible from the outside. Rather than having a glass viewing panel, there was instead a decorated piece of wood adorned with unusual visages depicting warped figures and, looking back, equally warped faces. Some had facial features, some did not. Some were even carrying large objects on their back, rectangular and charcoal black. Something was driving me towards the clock. Something unnatural. It was almost hypnotic. The vast web of gears inside working together perfectly to form a repeating tandem of ticking and tocking which matched the unending flow of the world which surrounded me. I slowly undid the small bolt which protected the innards of the clock from the outside world and pulled the wooden door away from it, like a surgeon preparing a patient for surgery. Looking inside that clock, I saw countless contradictions. It was living, yet it couldn't be. A horrible hybrid of time, life, death, and perfected mechanical motions presented itself before me. The dark, pulsating mess of flesh and brass seemed to move and twitch at perfectly timed intervals. As it pulsated, gears around it turned, culminating in a tick, followed by a tock. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Even though my mind was young, and in the process of being ripped apart by an unknown horror which would send even the most stable of people into a deep recess of insanity and depression, I understood. It was alive. The clock was alive. It was a fully functional clock, its timekeeping exact, and its timely chimes perfect. But it was still, somehow, alive. I stared for a moment before realizing the potential danger I was in, which caused me to start sliding backwards, still on the floor, until I hit the table behind me. I could see it all now, more than just a mechanical heart. Other bits of black flesh protruded from the gears, some of it convulsing, some of it simply staying still. I looked up at the face, and somehow it seemed to smile at me. Not a benevolent smile like the clockmaker's, but an almost insidious one, combining pleasure and malice into a concoction of revolting evilness. Without thinking, I slammed the door to the clock's innards shut, bolting the door as I felt a possessive gaze fixated upon the back of my neck. I bolted up, not daring to look back at whatever malevolent force had decided to wrought its reckoning upon me. I almost fell over the table as I rushed for the door to the workshop, pulling it open and throwing myself inside. With great relief, I actually found myself inside the workshop, its familiarity and relative normality giving me a brief respite of soothing reassurance. Any sense of relief, however, was short-lived. The clocks were ticking again, louder, more voracious, most chillingly of all, completely out of sync with each other. Everything began to warp as fresh tears filled my eyes. Nothing made sense as my ears were bombarded with unrelenting ticking, tocking, and the sound of heavy rain upon the windows. Without waiting a moment, I picked myself up and began running for the stairs, wailing and screaming with last-minute energy of an injured wolf. I climbed for what seemed like hours. I climbed, my sense of time and space warping with my vision as I slowly began to lose consciousness. I woke up the next day, tightly tucked into my bed. I checked the time, giving myself a small dose of panic-fueled adrenaline as the sound of the clock finally brought me to my full alertness. It was past noon, meaning that I had missed school. I shouted for my parents, and, to my great relief, my father answered my call. He explained to me that he had found me collapsed at the top of the stairs, just outside the door leading to our hall. My parents, assuming that I was either unwell or had spent the entire night awake, carried me to bed and decided to allow me to stay home from school. As he spoke, I simply nodded. Was it a dream I had while sleepwalking? It all seemed so real, but perhaps for the sake of my sanity, I convinced myself that none of it really happened. After all, a living clock. Even as a child, I knew that clocks couldn't be alive. After that, my life continued as normal. Almost. I avoided venturing downstairs during the night, whatever the cost, although a few times where I had no choice were remarkably uneventful. I developed a slight fear of clocks, and I would grow very uncomfortable if the ticking of a clock grew too loud. But beyond that, I simply placed the event in the furthest reaches of my mind. I'm 16 now, almost an adult and going through a bit of a rebellious phase. Honestly, up until yesterday, the traumatic dream I had as a kid had been forgotten, and I'd almost gotten over my unusual fear of clocks and timekeeping. However, what I saw yesterday dug up those memories, causing newfound dread that I've only experienced on that particular night. I came home early from school yesterday, and in the hopes of avoiding my dad, who I knew would be in the front workshop preparing for his next delivery, I decided to try and sneak around the back to pick up some cash and grab some lunch with. Thankfully, the foliage around the building provided ample cover, allowing me to move into the back garden without a single soul knowing. As I approached the back door, I noticed a figure through the window, sitting in the office with their back against the table. It only took me a moment to realize it was the clockmaker, leaning back whilst facing the immortal grandfather clock, which I'd almost cleansed from my memories. The clockmaker didn't make my life his business, so he would probably take little notice if I simply ducked in and out to grab what I needed whilst avoiding my dad. Before opening the door, however, I heard his voice seep out the halfway open window. "I'll have to replace it soon. It's getting old. Rotten, I would say. But don't you worry, dear. The folks upstairs have a healthy young'un, kind and sweet as a buttercup raindrop, I would say. A shame, really. A shame." His voice had an unusual youthfulness to it, yet it was accompanied with an element of spite which seemed out of place for the man of his character. This by itself was surprising, but to my shock, a voice replied, sending the events of 7 years ago into the forefront of my mind. It was not a human voice, nor a voice at all really. It was a series of ticks and tocks which somehow carried meaning, actual meaning. The pitch and tone of each chime shifted ever so slightly, somehow forming words in my mind without a morsel of my will entering it. The clockmaker suddenly seemed alert, turning his head to look at me, standing outside the window. His eyes were no longer those of the clockmaker I knew. The warmth drained and replaced with the coldness and smoothness of well-shined brass. He seemed neither angry nor surprised, although I could easily sense his intention from a mere glance. I ran. I ran as I did 7 years ago, filled with unending dread and hopelessness. I ran, knowing that any distance would be transcended on a level I could not comprehend. I ran. I consider this to be my last testament, and will perhaps. I know that no matter where I go, I'm doomed. Nobody can help me. I cannot help myself. It was not a dream. It was a moment where my fate was sealed. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The time I have will soon be mine no longer. With perfect precision, it'll be given to another, a being greater yet lesser than the human soul. Time is insurmountable, and it is marching right towards me. My mother picked me up from the airport in the dark hours of the morning. It had been a long flight and an even longer year. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the ranch house I grew up in looked like a little black shipwreck sticking out of the fog. Why is the kitchen light on? I wondered. Mom lives alone. We're here, boy. Oh, yes, we are, my mom shouted as she opened the door. That's odd, I thought. Is she talking to me? I rolled my luggage into the dark hallway. I didn't really need a light after all. I knew the place by heart. The jet lag was hitting hard, and I barely managed a hug and a simple conversation before I had to drag myself off to bed. I heard Mom's muffled voice from the kitchen as I drifted off to sleep. It was a sweet, cooing sort of sound, the tone of voice you'd use with a baby, or a pet. By the next morning, I'd forgotten all about it. I chugged black coffee and chomped on cereal while my mother and I tried to plan our visit. We'd always been close, but since I landed my dream job teaching in Japan, we only saw each other about once a year. We had to make it count. Well, that should be fine, my mom responded to the day trip I proposed, as long as I'm home in time to let Cooper out. Sorry, Cooper? Another thing about being away from people for a long time, differences that you might not notice otherwise, like aging or personality changes, really stand out, and they tend to be changes for the worse. I felt a pang of guilt looking around the place. It looked more small and worn down than I remembered. Oh, silly, you know, Mum winked. Cooper, the dog. I didn't know you'd gotten a dog. There it was again, that feeling of time slipping by. Really? Mom scrunched up her eyebrows. I thought for sure I mentioned it. Well, I'm sure you'll meet him while you're visiting. I hope you two get along. I do too, I thought, frowning. Truth was, I didn't really like dogs all that much, and I was pretty sure that feeling was mutual. I know how attached some people get to their pets, but when I look into a dog's forward-facing predator eyes, my first thought is, creatures like this used to hunt and eat creatures like me. I peered out the blinds at the dead grass and leaning shed outside. Two shining stainless steel bowls glinted in the winter sun. So, is Cooper out back or... Oh, I don't know. He comes and goes. I squinted at something across the way. A missing pet poster stuck to a telephone pole. It was for a cat, though. As I got us packed and bundled up for our day trip, my eyes fixed on a new addition to the house I hadn't noticed in the dark. Either it was a black rubber dog door built for a big dog. My eyes fixed on a new addition to the house I hadn't noticed in the dark either. It was a black rubber dog door built for a big dog. Each time it rattled in the wind, a shiver ran up my spine. When we finally pulled out of the driveway, I realized that I was actually relieved to be leaving my home behind, without a sign of Cooper. We arrived after dark, hungry and tired from too much driving with too many stops. I went straight for the kitchen to prepare dinner, and I was so focused on chopping vegetables that at first I didn't notice the strange sounds coming from the living room. There we go. Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Leaning around the corner, I saw my mom bent over in a rocker, making a stroking motion. Cooper, I figured. Odd that I hadn't heard him come in. Mom and Cooper were still at play when I finished the jambalaya. Or so I thought. But when I turned the kitchen corner, my mom was staring dead ahead at the TV. There was a program on about a pair of kids who'd gone missing from a playground a few blocks away. "Mom," I ventured, "can I help with Cooper?" "Thanks anyway, dear." My mother nodded and took the steaming bowl out of my hand. "But he just ran off. I'm sure he's around here somewhere. He comes and goes." "Yeah, you mentioned that." I was beginning to feel uneasy again, but I still couldn't say why. "Don't you think it's kind of odd that he hasn't come out to, I don't know, greet me or something? You're the first new person Cooper's known besides me." Mum sighed happily as she dug into her dinner. "Maybe he's just shy." That may have been true, but for the first time, I found myself unable to relax or unwind while visiting home, and it was all because of this unseen, unknown presence that just might pop up at any time. "Where does Cooper usually hang out?" I asked after a few hours of movies, snacks, and what's new with everybody chit-chat. "I think I'd like to say hi." "It makes sense that a shy dog would hide in the basement, right?" I tried to reassure myself as I descended the stairs. The scuffed up wood brought back childhood memories. In those memories, I always seemed to be running up them as fast as I could, terrified of what I'd see if I looked back over my shoulder. But I was an adult now, standing with my shoulders square at the bottom of the steps, ready to turn on the light. And there was nothing to be afraid of, right? I gave the chain a tug. The basement didn't seem like it had changed at all since I was a kid. Same dented filing cabinets, rusty cans, old appliances, a smell like dust and oil, and wet fur. "Cooper?" I whispered. I felt like a fool. I tried again, a little louder. "Cooper, here boy, Cooper." The cellar's damp and chill sank into my bones as I waited for a response. Nothing. With a sigh, I clicked off the bulb, started up the stairs, and heard something large padding around in the dark. With a start, I rushed back down, yanked on the light chain. Again, nothing. But I'd heard something out there among the cobwebs and covered furniture. I was sure of it. I waited a solid minute before heading back, defeated. The movement started again when I was about halfway up. That is, just as far from the upstairs light as the one downstairs. This time, it wasn't just skittering around. It was charging. The bulk of something much heavier than I was made the wooden steps creak and groan in the pitch blackness behind me. I ran as fast as I could, but even so, I felt hot, panting breaths on my shins before I burst into the light of the kitchen. Mom looked at me curiously. "Heh," I gasped. 20 years later, I guess I'm still scared of the basement, huh?" Without a word, my mother turned back to the blue glow of the TV. Apparently, there was no sign of the two missing children. Although I went to bed early that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept waiting to hear movement from the basement or the rubber door flap. I'd almost drifted off when I got my wish. The clatter of the flap, the clack of paws on a hard surface coming down my bedroom hallway. The sound got closer and closer, then seemed to pass right through my locked door. Whatever it was in the room with me. I sat up straight and turned on the light. I could hear its steps all around, and it sounded too big to hide. So, where was it? It was only when my instincts made me look up that I saw the muddy paw prints being tracked in circles on my bedroom ceiling. A chill ran down my spine, that scared prey sense that comes from being watched by unseen eyes. The invisible thing on my ceiling stopped, then growled. What the? I ran out of the room, heavy paw steps fast behind. I cried out to my mother, who had dozed off in a recliner. The growling behind me deepened, then stopped. Mom sat up and put on her glasses. "Oh," she smiled. I see you've met Cooper." "What?" I wheezed. I heard panting and the sound of a wagging tail scraping across the floor. What the hell was this? I watched invisible paws sink into the carpet as the panting thing padded over to my mom. Its growls turned into happy yelps as, I guessed, my mother scratched its belly. "Who's a good boy?" my mom cooed. I crept closer. "Mom?" I didn't know how to begin. "Do you see anything?" A snarl and a chomping sound cut me off. I felt, rather than saw, that something big had sprung to its feet before me and raised its hackles. Had a set of invisible jaws just snapped by my hand? "Oops," my mother cautioned. "It seems like it's still not used to you." I backed away until I was in the hallway, ready to run, then shouted, "There isn't a dog there. I don't know what you've got there, but it isn't a dog." "Don't be silly. Of course, Cooper is a very good boy. Yes, he is." The pleased yipping and whimpers resumed. It was more than I could take. I went back to my childhood bedroom, slammed the door and locked it. Not that it would do any good. When the noises finally stopped, I assumed my mother had gone to bed. I tried to keep any darker possibilities out of my mind because, as concerned as I was for her, the truth was that I was too scared to check, too scared of what might happen if I ran into that thing alone in the dark of the hallway, without my mother's apparently protective influence. I sat up in bed with the light on and an open pocket knife clutched in my fist, not like that would do much good against an invisible creature with claws longer than its blade, and tried to stay awake and vigilant. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was the sag of my bed as something heavy clambered close to me. My nose was overpowered by a reek like damp fur and rancid meat, but I didn't dare to move. For a couple of seconds, I lay stiff as a corpse with Cooper's hot breath sweeping across my face. Then it spoke. "Do you want to see me?" The voice was guttural and gravelly, like if a bear could talk. "See you? What are you?" I whispered. "What do you want?" "Do you want to see me?" it repeated. I screamed. I heard my mother's hobbling footsteps and felt awful for waking her, no matter how horrible the cause. The thing lowered its voice to a growling whisper as my mom fumbled with the door. "If you say yes, you can't take it back." "Cooper," my mom put her hands on her hips. "Get down from there, this instant." "I'm sorry," she laughed. "He's just not used to other people, you know." "Mom, what does Cooper look like to you?" "Well, honey," my mom scratched her head. "I mean, he's hard to describe. Like a standard dog, I guess." Why? Why would you ask me that?" "Well," I stammered, I can't see him. Can other people see Cooper?" Dead silence. Then, "How would I know? It's not like I can take him for walks at my age." "What do you mean you can't see him?" my mom stalled. That's just ridiculous." "Come on, you must have noticed that something's off," I pressed. "Like people look at you funny when you call him or play with him outside, or when the mailmen or Jehovah's Witnesses or Girl Scouts or whoever comes to the door, they just act like he isn't there, right?" The thing beside me didn't like this line of conversation at all. I felt it gently but firmly place a paw the size of a dinner plate on top of my stomach. Even with all the adrenaline running, I recognized that signal for what it was. A warning. One of those claws would open up my intestines like a sharp knife slicing through sausage. "I don't know what you're talking about," my mom snorted after a long pause. But I could tell that I was onto something. She couldn't see Cooper either. My mind flashed back to those stainless steel dog dishes out back, to the missing cat sign, to the 2 kids who'd vanished in this very neighborhood. Mom, I chose my words carefully. How did you find Cooper? What does he, eat? One day, I just heard him on my doorstep, whining and wagging his tail, so I told him he could come in. Mom put her hands on her hips. And he's not expensive to feed, if that's what you mean. Unlike you when you lived under this roof, Cooper takes care of himself. Are you sure Cooper doesn't get into any trouble? What do you mean? My mother's expression changed to one of genuine worry. Honey, you're scaring me. You don't want to scare Mom, do you? The thing snarled, so low that only I could hear it. As it did, it dug its claws into my stomach, ever so slightly. Nah, I faked a smile. It was just a bad joke. I'm just tired. I'm sorry. Well... My mother looked at me uncomfortably. If you still don't feel right in the morning, I can call Dr. Strauss. You know, the one you talked to when you had that incident back in high school. Did you know he's still practicing psychiatry, even at his age? I think you went to class with his daughter, in fact. She's a doctor now too, you know. I felt the invisible claws tapping impatiently on my very exposed belly. I whimpered. Yeah, okay. I'm just gonna try to sleep now, and it looks like Cooper and I are getting along a lot better, huh? You sure are. My mom finally smiled again. It was a tired smile, though. The years of careworn wrinkles I'd given her were clear, even as she switched off the light. Good night, honey. Feel better in the morning. With the lights off and the door closed, I was alone in total darkness with my mom's special pet. For a time, the heavy mass beside me just lay there, breathing heavily, its claw holding me firmly in place. After my mom's tottering footsteps fell silent, however, it nuzzled close. A huge, rough tongue licked the side of my face. Aww. A mocking growl hissed into my ear. Who's a good boy? There are a lot of things about being old that are absolutely garbage. Every day, a new part of me seems to hurt, and I have one speed: slow. But there is a sense of liberation. I finally feel free to tell the truth. After so many years of being tormented by lies, I can't begin to tell you how good this feels. The first lie, the one that began it all, came in a small, windowless room in an anonymous-looking office block. I was fresh out of film school. I was ambitious, bursting with ideas. I was ready for success. I was also thousands of dollars in debt. I needed a job, and when I saw an advert for a filmmaker role, my depressing visions of stacking shelves or serving burgers and fries faded away. It was described as working with a new company based in a city near my home. The starting salary was sweet, more than enough for me to begin digging myself out of my financial hole, and candidates had to have experience working on documentaries. As I sat in that small room, I thought of the film scripts I had written, of the dramatic short I had directed, of the way my imagination had always been praised by my tutors. I was all about the fictional. The door opened and two men walked in. They both wore beige suits and neither had a necktie. I could not decide if I was overdressed or underdressed in my denim shirt and skinny black tie. They thanked me for coming today, and beige suit number one began the interview by asking, "How would you sum up your filmmaking?" "I am all about the documentary," I replied. He smiled. I was acing this. Beige suit number two then asked, "How can you describe your most recent filmmaking project to us?" I thought back to my short, Girl Meets Boy, Boy Meets Alien, Love is Strange. Then I answered, "I recorded the life of a young man over the course of 24 hours. I wanted to show the truths that society forces men to mask, their insecurity, their pain, their weakness." I was pretty pleased with that off-the-cuff fiction. I gave myself 9 out of 10. It looked like both beige suits were impressed. Beige suit number 1 asking, "How long was the finished film?" Beige suit number 2 following straight after with, "Is there anything you did not include? Any truths that were too raw?" Thinking on all 10 of my toes at once, I went right back to them with 90 minutes and no. Their faces fell as one. 2 mouths drooped, 2 heads leaned forward, and both made notes. Damn, I thought. What had I said wrong? 90 minutes was long for TV, but would be acceptable in an independent cinema. It must have been my second answer. I smiled, putting myself on the other side of the imaginary camera for once, putting my acting skills on the fore, and said, "Of course, the truth is relative." One eyebrow perked up, another followed. "Tell us more," they said in unison. So I did. I talked and I talked and I talked. A few hours later, I was signing a contract. It must have been 20 pages long, and I was shown 4 different places to sign, which I duly did. I was thinking of the beer I would drink that night, the car I would be able to get on hire purchases the next day, the girls I would impress. I was only vaguely aware of one of the beige suits gathering up the contract's papers and placing them in a suitcase. He left one sheet on the desk. Helpfully, I picked it up and held it out to him. He shook his head. "That's your copy," he said. "A reminder." I grinned as if I knew what he was talking about, and after shaking hands, I left holding my piece of paper. I read it on the bus back to my apartment for something to do. It had my signature on the bottom. On the top, it read, "Official Secrets Act." I felt queasy by the time I went home. I did not want to spend the rest of my life in prison, so made a solemn promise to myself that I would do as the piece of paper instructed, and never breathe a word about what I did for my new employers. Not sober, not drunk, not trying to impress even the prettiest girl into bed. My lips were sealed no matter what I was asked to film. No problems here, I told myself, and began to drink. The next morning, the bus rattled and swayed as I headed back to the office for the first day of my new job. I hoped it would be an easy one. A few introductions, a gentle brainstorming session, an early finish. I got off the bus and went to reception. I signed in, was given a security pass, and told to report to the parking lot out the back. I headed there, and my heart sank when I saw one of the beige-suited men from my interview loading camera equipment into a truck. He waved at me and said, "Look lively. We need to be on location with cameras rolling in an hour's time." I swallowed down bile. "Great," I said. The suspension on the truck made the bus seem like a smooth glide over green fields. The throb in my head became a jackhammer, and my stomach bubbled and cramped and felt like it was going to go full erupting volcano on me at any moment. To this day, I do not know how I did not projectile vomit, but I made it and was left unpacking the equipment while Beige walked up to the house we had parked outside and pressed on the buzzer. We had already buzzed through a tall security gate and driven up a winding driveway. I paused to wipe sweat from my brow and silently cursed brews of beer everywhere and looked up at the house. House was actually an insult. This place was a mansion. It was 3 stories high with ornate pillars on either side of the door and looked immaculate. Heaven help any bird that dared crap on these walls, I thought, and followed Beige to the now open doors, my arms loaded with the tools of the filmmaker's trade. Inside was even more impressive. Wooden floors polished within an inch of their lives, paintings that looked like they belonged in museums, and statues. Real, for goodness, statues. I almost fell over a trailing cable I was carrying while gawping at one of a semi-naked lady playing a lute. Eventually, we reached the massive room with a mahogany table at its center. A white-haired man was sitting at it, poring over a sprawling pile of paper. Beige stood silently. I tried not to drop anything. The man, thankfully for my aching arms, looked up. A familiar smile spread across a familiar face. I am not going to go as far as to name the man I now recognized. I do not think it would be fair to his family, but I will say that Beige nodded deferentially and said, "Good morning, Senator." "And a fine morning it is," the man replied, and emerged from behind his desk to come and shake hands with both of us. He wore a white suit that probably cost more than the camera and sound gear I now placed on the floor. Whoever did the floors had possibly also given his face a polish. He sparkled and chuckled as he said, "So, you've come to show the good people of this state how I spend my days?" "We certainly have," Beige replied and turned to me, as if I knew exactly what was meant to happen next. The senator saved me. "Shall we start with a shot of me doing work at my desk?" he said. It was one of those questions which really wasn't a question. Beige grinned. "Sounds perfect." Now up to speed, I began to set up the equipment. The rest of the day passed in setup after setup as we recorded the senator, meeting visitors, chatting with his head gardener, making an important phone call, mimed and from 3 different angles, and standing looking thoughtfully out the window. We had brought no lighting with us, and when Beige and the senator agreed, a shot of him closing a folder holding a document he had just signed and putting the top on his gold fountain pen would be fantastic. I had to point out the light levels would not work. Beige glared at me, but the senator looked wise, an expression I had seen slip on and off his face with remarkable ease all day, and said, "Tomorrow is another day." And that, as they say, was a wrap. I was left to pack up and manhandle everything back to the truck. A couple of hours later, I was back on the bus, a snoring man drooling on my shoulder. I was smiling from ear to ear. I was a professional filmmaker. So what if it was a vanity project? It was a beginning, and I daydreamed all the way home about my first feature opening in the years to come and the rave reviews that would follow. Maybe, I wondered, the senator might want to finance it, or point me in the direction of his wealthy friends with a hearty recommendation that, "This young man is hugely talented. He always ensures I was beautifully lit." I woke early the next morning and arrived at the office before Beige. We returned to the senator's mansion, but it turned out he had called away on urgent business. We took some exteriors while we were there, and then set off for the next assignment. As we headed along roads I did not recognize, I asked Beige what we would be filming. Channeling the senator, he looked sage and he replied, "Son, one lesson about working for the government is not to ask questions. If you need to know, when you need to know, someone will tell you. Makes life much simpler, I assure you." To tell the truth, stupid as it makes me look, I had not realized up to that point that I was working for the government. The Official Secrets Act document I had signed had not specified this, and my head had been packed with too many other things to work it out for myself. The new startup in the advert had been baloney then. Not a problem, I decided, because I was a professional filmmaker. What sweet words those were. After about 30 minutes, we left the main road and followed a track through verdant countryside until we pulled up next to a small river. "We need to get a series of close-ups of the water," Beige told me. "We want to capture its natural beauty." "Can do," I answered and got out the equipment. The water was crystal clear and rich with darting fish. The sunlight glinting off its surface was perfect. I gave Beige a thumbs up and, Shots in the can, we were soon back on the move. We stayed on quiet roads until we reached a high, wire fence topped with curling steel barbs. An armed security guard stepped out of the booth and asked to see our ID before opening the gate to let us in. From bucolic to barbed wire, I thought, but kept my mouth shut. No questions, I remembered. We passed through 2 more checkpoints before we reached our destination. I recognized it from news articles. It was a new power plant funded with multi-millions from the government. It was about the ugliest thing I'd ever seen, and my good spirits dipped as I was asked and filmed a series of exteriors. Next came an interview with the plant manager, conducted as he took us on a tour of the inside of the concrete and steel monstrosity. With that wrapped, we were heading back to the truck when I noticed the small river running behind the plant. Absent-mindedly, I wandered over to it and was sickened to see the water was filthy and a dead fish floating on the surface. I realized Beige was standing behind me when he said, "When we get back to the office, you will edit in the other river." I spun round. What he was asking was appalling. He smiled and said, "Mom and Pop and Junior don't want to see dead fishes in the evening bulletin when they are hoovering up their meatballs. They'd much prefer to think that taxes are making the world a better place. They'll sleep much better." He stepped closer to me, almost touching, and added, "Do you see?" It was a question, wasn't a question, and I did not argue. And from that moment, I was complicit. I told myself many times over the weeks that followed that I was doing this on my terms, that I was gaining experience and making contacts and building up a portfolio. But in truth, I was part of a machine that covered up unpalatable truths with sugar-coated films. I recorded government officials supervising the handing out of food parcels in a poverty-stricken district, all filmed out on a lot near the office, with actors playing the grateful recipients of the aid. I shot a film about a government workshop where the long-term unemployed learnt new skills. From their glazed eyes, I could tell they had been given dope before the camera rolled. These and many more left me feeling disgusted with myself. By the time we rolled up back at the senator's mansion, I'd almost forgotten that first day of filming. I trapezed inside, carrying the equipment and wondering if he knew what was happening. With his power and reach, he must have, I decided. Maybe it was even his idea. I set up in the grand dining room as I'd been instructed. Beige had told me we were here to film the senator dining with his wife. We were going to capture a simple scene that families across the state would recognize, and then he headed off, telling me he was going to let the senator know we would be ready for him in 10 minutes. I glanced up at the ornate candelabra and worked out my angles so it would not be in the shot. Perhaps I could edit in footage of a lethargic lava lamp later to make the scene look more down to earth. I smiled bitterly and was checking the sound levels when she walked in. She was beautiful. Her dark auburn hair was loose over her shoulders, and she wore an elegant black dress. I stood there, feeling very naive and young, as she made her way across the room to a drinks cabinet. She started to pour a drink. "I'm not going to ask you if you want one," she said. "I know it won't be allowed." She turned then, and sipped on a drink, and I noticed the bruising around her eye, the cut on her lip. "I assume with some clever lighting and editing, you can make these disappear," she said. "Or do I need more makeup?" I realized I had been staring and looked away, embarrassed. She smiled sadly and poured herself another drink. "I suppose you think I'm pathetic?" she asked, "a wife living off a wealthy husband and putting up with this." She reached up and touched the mouth. "I don't think that," I managed to say. I was shocked and angry. She looked into her drink, swirled the amber liquid around. "It's not always been like this. He was sweet and loving when we first married, but as his career soared, he had changed. He was always ambitious, but now he is driven by pure greed. for the finest food which he gorges himself on, for the best wines which he drinks until he passes out, and for pain. He smiles when he hits me. He smiles his favourite smile, which he turns on for the cameras and the crowds. She lowered her hand. It's wrong. He shouldn't hit you. No one should. She finished the drink, and we stood there in silence. I felt lost. What could I do? Suddenly, I knew. I reached out, took the camera off the tripod, and hoisted it onto my shoulder. It's time for people to see the truth, I said. I wanted to expose the senator, but for me to do that, she would be exposed as well. She looked at me, and I waited for her answer. And then, we heard the scream. It was a man's voice, crying out in terror and pain. Neither of us hesitated. We ran towards the sound. It's coming from my husband's office, she said. I turned the camera on. I did not know the new aberration the senator had committed, but I was determined to capture it on film. I followed her into the office, heard her gasp, saw her body stiffen in shock. Before I saw it too. Dark liquid pooling on the floor. It was blood, I realised, in a trail that led out through the open French windows into the garden. The camera still rolling, I followed the trail. Watching the footage afterwards, as I stepped out onto the grass, the camera began to shake. The image blurs, and then it comes back into focus. And there it is. The man I called Beige, his suit stained with blood. The flesh of his neck and his face has been ripped open. Skin and muscle is being pulled upwards and torn away by a creature from a nightmare. Its skin was drawn tight across its bones, and its eyes were sunken hollows. Its mouth hung open, and its teeth was ripping at the remains of the dead man cradled in its arms. Its white, blood-splattered suit hung off its frame. And still, the camera rolled. I was not even aware I was holding it until she put a hand on my other shoulder. We have to get away, she whispered. I could not reply. I could barely breathe. Fear held me rooted to the spot. Before he sees us, she said. He, I thought. Her husband. The thing he had become. I began to cry as the terror of what I was witnessing washed over me in cold waves. She took my arm and led me away, and all the while the creature gorged and bit and slavered on its human feast. After this, what happened has stayed with me as moments. The camera had run out of film. My memory shows me flashes. The truck starting, with her at the wheel, road signs slipping past, a motel room, me lying sobbing in a lap. Then we drive on to a new place, a new anonymous town as we ran away. This was 40 years ago, and every day up to her death last fall, I thought how grateful I was to have met her. We never married, but we lived as a couple, sharing everything. We made our home in a cold, distant place, where on winter nights I learned of ancient legends, of men corrupted and transformed, of creatures whose hunger can never be sated. I did not pick up a camera again, though I kept my old equipment in a shed, along with reels of film. I am going to carry everything out of the woods and burn it now. It is time to rid myself of the past. I am an old man. I am tired, and I want to be able to close my eyes and rest without remembering legends made real. My wife, Lacey, was in a car crash in April of 2020. Well, not so much as a car crash, as a car winging her at a crossroad at 54 miles per hour. She hit the pavement so hard it fractured parts of her throat and collarbone. Her left arm broke in 3 places. It was brutal. As I stayed with her and her family in the hospital, we had plenty of worries. She had a serious concussion, and we were anxious it might lead to something permanent. The doctors kept talking about the use of her left arm and her fine motor skills. It was only one single nurse who touched upon what would turn out to be the most permanent damage: her throat. At first, the doctors just told her not to speak. We were told she had to rest and regain her strength, so there would be no speaking for weeks as her throat healed. She also had to wear a sort of neck brace, this awful-looking metallic thing. She was in desperately low spirits, but so very thankful for everything we did. As the weeks turned into months, most of her fractures and broken bones healed, but not her throat. Lacey still couldn't talk, no matter how much she tried. I remember once when we stood in the kitchen, I looked her in the eyes and told her I loved her, and all she could say back was this wheezing whistle. She had some sort of panic attack and locked herself in the bathroom, trying to scream. We went through lots of trouble trying to restore her voice. Hour after hour of strenuous exercises. She even had a few minor surgeries. At one point, Lacey started drinking this sort of home remedy from something she learned online. She got stomach cramps for about 3 days afterwards. No wonder though, most of that recipe was just rosemary, olive oil, and some bullcrap flower extracts you could order online. The result was always the same. Lacey locked herself in the bathroom and cried, a parade of disappointment. I grew impatient seeing her despair over and over, so I joined her in a hunt for a treatment. But it had to be something guaranteed. I couldn't bear to see her disappointed again. Trying to find something to restore a broken voice is close to impossible online. Just sorting through the scams is a full-time job. Whenever I had a few minutes over at work, I would post in forums and check search alerts. I had to open a second email account just to handle the sign-up spam. I got sent a few earnest responses, but most of it just linked to dead ends or holistic nonsense. There were a few genuine responses with links to articles, experimental treatments, and upcoming technology. Nothing was accessible or even realistic. It took me 3 weeks to get an email that I cared to read all the way through. It came from an auto-generated email account, but somehow got through my spam filter. It read, "Don't worry, I know what you're going through. I know someone who can help. Don't be alarmed and follow these simple steps. 1. Plant and care for the seeds. 2. Welcome the guest. 3. Listen to the song. 4. Don't pick the white one." At first, I didn't think much of it. It was strange, but anyone who's been online for any longer period of time know that people like to make stuff up all the time. I just put it aside and thought no more of it. That is, until 3 days later, when there was a small white envelope dropped on our doorstep. Inside, there was an unmarked package of seeds. I considered flushing them down the toilet, but I couldn't. The bathroom door was locked. Again, Lacey was crying. The sound of a broken throat sniffling over the sink broke my heart, as so many times before. I opened my mouth to speak, but couldn't bring myself to do it. Even if there was close to no chance of this working, I had to try. I would do anything to make her happy again. I just wanted to hear her call me Sunny Bear again. Cutest nickname I've ever had. So I planted the seeds in our flower bed in the front yard, watered them, and cursed myself for being an idiot. Seeds turned to sprouts, that turned to stalks. From the stalks came buds, and from those flowers came these radiant royal blue sunflowers. It took less than a month, and even though they were smaller than ordinary sunflowers, Lacey loved them. She tried to bring a few into the house in a pot, but they kept dying. We decided on just leaving them be outside, letting them grow and cheer us up whenever we left the house. Not that we went outside much. 2020 was one hell of a year. One night, Lacey and I had a bit of a fight. She got easily frustrated whenever I talked too much, as she couldn't effectively talk back. So, whenever I got a bit too talkative, she would leave the room. It frustrated me having to keep my thoughts on a short leash. Usually, we could talk about anything at any time. Now, I had to walk on eggshells. No wonder I started spending more time soldering knickknacks in the garage. We could barely be in the same room anymore. As I was repairing our front door lamp, I noticed a shadow on our driveway. It wasn't technically on our property, but it was clear they were observing me from the road. I couldn't make heads or tails of their frame, but it was clearly a normal-sized person, possibly wearing a large coat. "Can I help you?" I asked loudly. There was no response. A brisk wind rattled the flower bed, which reminded me of that email I got way back when. It takes so little for the mind to travel to the most obscure crevices. "I think I'm supposed to welcome you," I said. "If not, well, have a good night." As I started walking back to the front door, I kept talking. It was just nice to talk again. But just, "You are welcome, just to clarify." I took one more look back at the shadow on the driveway, only to notice it was gone. Over the coming days, I would notice Lacey standing by the window. A few times I would ask her what she saw, but she would just sigh and walk away. Soon I just stopped asking. Several times a day, she would stand by the front door or look out the window. Every time she'd look in the same direction as where I'd seen that shadow of a person standing in the driveway. And yet, there was nothing there. Not that I saw. It was by now we started sleeping in separate beds. She had expressed how she felt pressured and sort of intruded upon, and that she wished for us to find our way back to each other with love rather than obligation and a sense of must. I couldn't blame her. Marriage takes work, and she wouldn't be happier if I forced her to do something she was uncomfortable with. Instead, I started sleeping in the guest room. She would still be kind enough to make the bed while I was at work though, so not all was lost. There was warmth between us still. I didn't even think about the third item on the list. Listen to the song. What song? It didn't make any sense. Yet, I found myself thinking about that list more and more. I'd done 2 things on it, and it hardly took any effort at all. It was almost as if it was being done to me, rather than the other way around. But there was no song to listen to. At least there wasn't, until I started listening to Lacey. I don't know how long she'd been humming it. It was that kind of droning background noise that had just always been there. She could still hum and hit all tunes, but I had no idea what the song actually was. So, one day, I just kissed her on the cheek and asked her about it. "No idea," she responded with a text-to-speech app. "Nursery rhyme?" It kinda had the tune for it. Calm and a bit melancholic. Music boxy in a way. There was no way to just search for the tune, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Hell, if I were 3 points on a 4-point list, I might as well go all the way. I started humming it too. In fact, I hummed it so much, I started to make up words for it in my head. At one point during lunch hour, I stopped to put it all in writing, just to see what Lacey would think. I wrote, "You're my friend, I'll sing your tune, a setting sun to rising moon. I ask you, buddy, buddy blue, won't you be a sunflower too?" I showed it to her as soon as I got home. To say Lacey didn't care for it would be an understatement. She just stared at the paper. She was lost for words, in more ways than usual. I tried talking to her, but she was growing hysterical. Again, she locked herself in the bathroom, crying harder than usual. This time, I took it pretty hard. "Just talk to me," I screamed, pounding at the door. "Just use the damn app. Make an effort." No response, just more crying. "Lacey, for the love of God, you gotta give me something to work with. Just please, just make an effort. I'm right here. You're the one locking the door. I'm standing right here. I'm with you, please." And yet, despite all the pounding and all the yelling, the door stayed locked. A paper slid out from under the door. It was the lyrics I made up for the song, with a big "screw you" written across it in an eyeliner. That night, I was near the breaking point. We were getting into November, and even the blue sunflowers were getting dry. I took a 2-hour walk through what was quickly turning into a harsh storm, blowing leaves into my face the entire way. When I finally got to a nearby restaurant turned bar, I decided to take out my restorations and whatever number of drinks it would take me to calm the hell down. Right next to me were 2 guys who worked at the steel mill about half an hour's drive south. I'd seen them around town, but we never really talked. Still, after living the life I'd lived for the past few months, I wanted nothing more than to talk until my throat was sore. They seemed eager enough to keep the conversation going. If nothing else, at least we could complain about work. 3 drinks in, I started talking about Lacey and her condition. One of the brothers just nodded along, but the other just looked at me curiously. As I stumbled into the topic of the strange email I'd gotten, he just stared at me. "I've heard that," he said. "Ain't that the Silver Tongue game?" The brothers looked at one another. "You're right," the other brother coughed, slack-jawed. "That takes me back." Apparently, the Silver Tongue game was something that kids who wanted to be great singers used to play back in the 1910s. It was a local topic of conversation, sort of a forgotten superstition. Now that they mentioned it, I could vaguely remember hearing about it. The first rule, to plant and care for the seed, was not meant to be so literal. Originally, it was about daring kids to swallow sunflower seeds and drink as much water as they could. The second rule, to welcome the guest, was a metaphor for breaking a rule. Kids weren't supposed to welcome guests into their house, so to welcome a guest was shorthand for doing something you're not supposed to. The third rule, to listen to the song, was to sing a specific nursery rhyme where others could hear it. Anyone who knew of the game would recognize it and punish you, but most adults tend to forget it as they grow up. "Then there's the fourth one," said the now drunk second brother. "Don't pick the white one. That's still the same as it was back then." "But what does it mean?" "It means what it means. Don't pick the white one," he shrugged. "When the devil comes to give you a new tongue, don't pick the white one. It looks the most like silver, but it ain't." I stepped away to text Lacey, but I got no response. The wind was picking up outside, and I was starting to worry about getting home in one piece. The brothers were calling it a night, but they weren't in any condition to drive. They had an Uber coming, but they were going the other way, so we said our goodbyes. I was left standing in the parking lot, not knowing where to go or what to do. Finally, I just started walking. The walk turned into a jog, and the jog turned into intermittent sprints. A thought hit me. I hadn't followed the rules. I hadn't swallowed any sunflower seeds. I hadn't broken any conventions or done what I was supposed to do. I wasn't the one who started to sing the other song either. Lacey did. Had she done all the same things, but the right way? If so, she was on the final step. What had she been doing? I was getting worried. I knew it was all superstition, but the sunflower seeds had showed up on our doorstep. There had been a stranger there, watching us. Lacey had been acting strange lately, and she'd been locking herself in the bathroom more frequently. Had we been doing the same thing without telling one another? I got back home around midnight, my hands frozen stiff. My heart was pounding, and I didn't even know why. I was getting anxious. I fumbled for my house keys as I walked up the driveway, only to realize the front door was open. I don't know at what point I started saying, "No, no, 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 no," to myself, but there it was, repeated like a damn Hare Krishna mantra. "Lacey," I called out. The house was quiet, except for the wind forcing itself through the cracks in the front door. I hurried to the bathroom, only to see it was still locked. I pounded on the door, but it was useless. I ran out to fetch my tools, only to see a shadow standing in the driveway. I don't know if it was the same thing that I'd seen before, but there was one difference between this time and the first time I'd seen them. I'd fixed the light that goes above the front door. As I hit the switch, the intruder stepped out of the shadows. I'll never forget the sight of this woman. Easily 6'5", but all hunched up in a crouch. She had this wild, bush-like black hair that pointed in all directions. Her skin had this metallic grey and blue tone with a dry and hardened texture like cracked leather. At first, I didn't think she had a face, as it was so thin I could see more of her skull than her features. Her eyes were completely covered in grey, and her pale lips were retracted in a forced smile. She was emaciated beyond what I thought a human could survive, and wearing nothing but a large fur-like coat. I could see the edge of her bare knees, feet and elbows sticking out. There was something on the inside of her cloak. Tongues. "No," my mantra continued. "No, no, no." Her face barely moved, but it didn't take much for me to realize her mouth had curled into a smile. I started backing away into my garage. She started sprinting towards me. I slammed the door down and pressed the lock. I stumbled over my workbench, knocking over tools and cables as I reached for the lock on the side door. As I clicked it shut, I picked up the biggest wrench I could find and stepped back into the middle of the room. I could barely hear the wind outside as my heart swallowed all sounds. All but one. "Sonny Bear, are you there?" It was a voice. It took my reptile brain a few seconds to recognize it. I hadn't heard it in so long. That was Lacey's voice. Now I was the one who'd locked myself in a room, hearing my loved one trying to get in. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. That thing out there had to be something else. That couldn't be my Lacey. Still, no one else called me Sonny Bear. No one. "That's not you," I said. "It can't be you." "It's me, baby. Open up." "No, no. You're not thinking straight. Let's talk about this. Tell me what you wrote on the note." It got quiet. The wind was howling outside, drowning out my thoughts. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it turning my stomach. I was gonna be sick. "Tell me what you wrote." No response. I knew it. It felt like an eternity, but it must have been no more than 10 seconds that passed. "Come out and she'll get a new one," the Lacey voice said, slowly shifting pitch. "I don't trust you. She chose the white one, you know." The voice had turned venomous and dark, only keeping a vague cadence of what used to be Lacey. "What does that mean?" "You'll see, Sonny Bear. Just go away. You'll never hear her again. No more whispers, no more songs." This ticked me off to no end. My mood swung from a complete, tear-drenched panic into a stomach-acid-fueled rage. I swallowed my thoughts, feeling my dry tongue stick against the corners of my mouth. I tightened the grip on my wrench as I opened the side door. Nothing. I hurried inside the house and, using the wrench, managed to break the lock on the bathroom door. There, on the floor, was Lacey. Her tongue was swollen and white, her eyes blank. She wasn't breathing. I just fell to my knees, dropping the wrench. I took her into my arms, just repeating the same thing over and over. No, no, no. I had to try something. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911 on speakerphone as I started giving her CPR. Every breath I blew into her mouth tasted of foul copper, but there was nothing I wouldn't do. I could barely register a conscious thought as I screamed for help. I don't know how long we stayed on the tear-stained floor. All I know is that after an eternity had passed, and as I heard an ambulance rolling up on the driveway, Lacey gasped for breath. As we locked eyes, I smiled. We didn't have to say a word to communicate. Yes, I love you too. Large parts of her tongue had to be removed. It was some sort of infection that spread to her mouth, and she was in a serious condition. Her blood levels were all over the place. Still, she eventually recovered. Today, Lacey's throat is fine. She still can't talk, but we're doing better. The trauma is there, but she's seeing a regular therapist and working through her diagnosed PTSD. Still, I'm not sure that I trust the therapist. Dr. Jane gives me some creepy vibes. Lacey and I are doing fine. There were so many things that can be said without words, and when the need rises, we've started to adapt to new tools and tricks. Whiteboards on the fridge for good morning greetings, just mouthing I love you as I leave for work, an earnest smile when I get back home. As I suspected, Lacey had been following the same rules as I had, but she had a bit more context. She ordered the same type of sunflower that kids used to eat the seeds off of back in 1910, the obscure Tom Scott sunflower that she bought from a collector. As for the second rule of doing something she wasn't supposed to do, she started smoking in the bathroom. And the song, well, I didn't know what it meant. Singing it in front of me was part of the game. The only problem was the fourth rule, not to pick the white one. Recently, I had the courage to ask her about what really happened that night, why she chose the white one, and why she allowed herself to be tricked. It was the rules not to pick it after all, so how could she fall for it? That's the trick, Lacey told me. They were all white. The winters are brutal here. Even though I live in the city, just about every night, someone freezes to death. A good chunk of those throwing boiling water and watching it freeze videos are from here. Even if the sun is out, it still hurts to breathe. When the sun goes down, it hurts to exist. As soon as it gets dark, Fahrenheit and Celsius slam into each other in a horrid marriage of -40 degrees. The air turns into crystallized pain. No one walks slowly after sundown. He was staring at the rusted wheelchair ramp of my housing block, shivering beneath a pile of rags. I had forgotten one of my gloves at work, and the overfilled plastic bags I was carrying were cutting into my swollen hands. I was worried about losing my fingers, but I knew I couldn't live with myself if I let an old man freeze to death. "Hi, mister. I don't think we've met. I'm Alexei. Can I help you up this ramp?" "Stay away. I have nothing to give you." "Oh, I don't want anything from you, mister. We just hate to see a new neighbor freeze to death. So, how about it? Can I help you up this ramp?" No response. Too proud to ask for help. Yet, when I grabbed the handles of his wheelchair, he didn't resist. He just grumbled. I'm pretty apt with wheelchairs and strollers, and it wasn't the first time that I forgot my gloves at work. But pushing the old man up the ramp was harder than it should have been. While we waited for the elevator to come, I made a quick note to talk to the building manager about the rusty ramp. "Which floor will it be, mister?" Out of his rags, the man produced a crumbled piece of stained paper. He tried to make sense of the handwriting. "Ah, floor 7. Looks like we're neighbours." "Yes, 7th floor." The elevator creaked and groaned with its usual strains and dragged us up towards the roof of the complex. With the stinging pain fading from my eyes, I got a chance to look at the stranger. White hair with the consistency of spiderweb, skin and bone and stubble, a discomforting amount of swelling over his right eye. "So, Mr. New Neighbour, are you around these parts?" "No." "Are you from here?" "No." "I'm born and raised right here in this winter wonderland. Quick tip, don't ever turn that radiator knob lower than the maximum. It's a nice little home that we have here, but the heating system is back from the Soviet days. Tends to leak as soon as you tamper with it. And boy oh boy, are those things no fun to fix." No response. I was used to old folks being suspicious and quiet, but from my experience, once you talk for a bit, they tend to open up. My new neighbour wasn't like the other old-timers I've met. All that kept us company for the elevator ride was the choking and coughing of metal. "Here we are, 7th floor." He passed me the keys. They were covered in rust, but they fit the door. A stove, a bed, a window, the bare minimum for survival. All the Soviet-built housing projects have a sort of melancholy about them, but there was something especially desperate about that cramped room. An aura of dread and mildew flowed through the air. Then again, that could have just been the old man. As soon as I opened the door, my new neighbour wheeled himself to the window. "Well, like I said before, my name is Alexei. Nice to meet you." The old man didn't turn away from the window. Outside, the world was still. Nothing but a collection of snow-covered panel housing and flickering lamplight. I work in a supermarket, and they let me take food that's past its due date. There's nothing wrong with the food, just can't be sold. Would be ashamed to see it go to waste, so I bring it back to the folk over here. Quite a big haul today. Lots of beans. Would you like—" "I have nothing to give in return. Leave me. I've not come here to make friends. I've come here to die." I left the man 2 cans of beans on the stove. The weather was significantly kinder in the morning. Having a day off from work, I went to talk to the building manager about the ramp. We still had to wear scarves around our faces, but the icicles on the railing were starting to melt. As we cleared the ramp, we spoke of spring. Above my unit lives a single mother with a particularly noisy, yet adorable infant. When she saw the newly cleaned ramp, she was ecstatic. All of a sudden, the daily struggle of getting the carriage inside of the apartment complex was gone. It felt nice to know I'd managed to improve her life, if only just a little bit. Yet, she was not the neighbour who I was most concerned about. The mailbox for the old man's unit didn't have a name on it. Neither did his door. When I rang the doorbell, there was no answer. I pressed down on the bell for a bit, just in case the old man's hearing was bad. After about 30 seconds, he acknowledged me. "If you're here to rob me, I have nothing." "Not here to rob you, mister. It's me, Alexei, your neighbour. I've brought you more food." No response, but the door wasn't locked. He sat facing his window, just where I'd left him. The cans of beans, however, were empty. "Me and the building manager clean the ramp. Should have no troubles going up and down on your own. If you ever want company for a walk, though, I'd be more than happy to join you." "Why?" "Walks with strangers are pretty fun. The neighbourhood is a lot of concrete, but I think it has a certain charm to it. There's an abandoned hotel nearby where students get together and play jazz from time to time. Once it warms up, I'll be happy to take— Why do you help me?" That dread, that sense of discomfort was still in the air, but it wasn't as prominent as the evening prior. With the sun shining and the laughter of children echoing from the housing projects, the world seemed a bit more welcoming. Why do I help you? Because it's the right thing to do. God knows we have to help each other. It's a cold world out there. An aspiring saint. Helping those in need makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel special. I don't think I'm special, mister. I just like to help. I think most people are like that. His wheelchair creaked like nails on a chalkboard as he turned around to face me. His sunken eyes regarded me as if I were a maniac. Something had changed in his face from the day prior, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Most people want to help. Are you truly so naive as to believe in the goodness of mankind? What of the wars? What of the orchestrated famines? What of the men who forced Mayday parades through the clouds of radiation? I shrugged. I try not to think about that. Don't see much of a point in it, mister. The Soviets are in the past. If we all work together, we can build a better world. The swelling that once existed beneath his right eye had now moved to the left, leaving behind dark, diseased skin. If you would have witnessed what I've witnessed, you would know how foolish you sound right now. All your thoughts of human goodness and charity dissipate in the face of reality. Man cannot rule over man. Staying in power requires an iron grip, and that grip, that cursed strangle of rule, will squeeze any semblance of humanity out of the ruler. If you would have seen what I've seen, you would know that no amount of charity can save us. What have you seen, mister? Makarov. Dr. Konstantin Makarov. The swelling around his left eye pulsed, causing him to grit his remaining teeth. The man had introduced himself as a doctor, but he clearly needed to go to the hospital. I was about to offer to take him to the nearby clinic, but before I had a chance to offer my help, he spoke once more. I have seen unspeakable horrors processed through flawed human systems. I've seen good men fall into despair in the face of this horrid reality that swirls beneath the facade of stability. My name is Konstantin Makarov, and I have worked. The children outside went silent. The lights in the apartment flickered in the same way they did before the blackouts of the 90s. The swollen flesh on Makarov's face throbbed as if it was trying to reach past his skin. My name is Konstantin Makarov, and I have worked as a chief scientist in Illinois. Saying the words clearly drained the man, yet for all the weaknesses in his voice, the throbbing of swollen flesh on his forehead strengthened. With each shivering pulse, it seemed as if the infected skin was about to force its way out of its skull. I immediately grew worried for the old man. Dr. Makarov, your face. May I take you to the clinic? I have a friend there. I'm sure he would happily inspect you for free. The growth on your face looks... No. The rapid heartbeat in the old man's face died down. With a screech of rusted iron, he turned back around to the window. Down below, the neighborhood children were riding old plastic bags down a snowy hill. Please, just leave me be. I've not come here to be a charity case. I've come here to die. I thought of saying something, but I didn't. Instead, I just left the man another can of beans in the stove. The structure was said to be hidden in the forest that neighbored our housing projects. In educated circles, the structure was known as the building formerly known as the United People's Institution of Science. Around campfires in the village pubs, it was known as Illinois. When I was young, my uncle used to tell us stories about it. He described the place as an old Soviet science facility that dabbled in knowledge beyond the scope of human understanding. He spoke of monsters and curses and forbidden knowledge. I listened to his stories in rapt attention, but even as a child, I considered them to be fiction. As an adult, I considered it to be the byproduct of our collective imagination, a way to explain away the 60 years of harsh Soviet rule. After talking to Makarov, I wasn't so sure. The man was old, but he was not mad. Illinois existed, and he worked within its confines at some point. That was not what kept sleep away from me that night. It was the old man's eyes that convinced me that not only was that place real, but that at least some of the stories I heard about it were true. There was no doubt in my mind that Markarov had seen something unearthly in his previous work. The whole night through, all I could think of was that throbbing mass of flesh stemming from his skull. I spent most of my morning thinking about it too. I tried to figure out the source of the injuries, the way that something so discomforting could manifest. Yet all I found was pained empathy. Thoughts of swollen flesh followed me to my morning shift, where they metastasized into a burning migraine. By the time I got back home, I could barely think straight. I put aside the leftover groceries for later and settled down on the couch for a nap. I thought that after a bit of rest, I could go hand out the leftover food and check on Markarov. Yet sleep refused to come. Instead, I laid on the couch with stinging pain in my head and nausea rolling around in my stomach. There was tenseness in the air, like the kind that festers up when a fight is about to happen. I lay there, sick and anticipating something I couldn't put my finger on. Bzzzt. I came to the door before I had a chance to press the buzzer twice. Markarov's strange growth had shifted once more. Now it was sitting in between his eyes, making his face look like a highwayman mask made of bruises. Alexei, I'm not long for this world. I appreciate your help throughout my short time here, but there is one more favor I could ask of you. Seeing the poor Frau man dragged all of my attention away from the migraine. Of course, Dr. Markarov. How can I be of help? Take me to the roof. The roof? I don't think it's very safe there. You could easily... He looked sicker than before. Much sicker than before. A reason for why he would want to take me to the roof immediately struck me. I'm not looking to jump, if that's what you're thinking. No, Alexei. I merely want to see the sunset one last time. I fear my body will not make it through the night. I can take you to the clinic. Surely they can help you there. I'm much more qualified than any doctor at any clinic in this provincial town. I know the nature of my injuries, and I've made peace with them. Now please, neighbour, would you help me make my way to the roof? Beyond us stretched an infinitely repeating collection of cement colosseums. Below us, in the centre of each of the circular panel houses, children played. Their laughter echoed below us, a reminder of joy in a sea of brutalist architecture. See, Doctor, doesn't the neighbourhood have a charm about it? The old man was completely deaf to my attempts at small talk. He just stared into the steadily reddening sky, lost in his own thoughts. I've been part of something horrible. What do you mean, Doctor? I've been part of something horrible, and for decades I've stayed silent. I believe that what I did was for the greater good. I believed my work at the facility would usher in a new era of humanity. I believed that what I partook in was a necessary evil. But now that I sit here, now that all is done, I always had doubts. On a primal level, I knew that I was doing something wrong. But I've always denied myself the clarity of thought. The mass of flesh beneath his forehead started to pulse harder than it ever had before. Even past his bruises, the old man's skin was turning the colour of the setting sun. The growth on his forehead was completely foreign to me, but the look in his eyes was familiar. In my younger years, I volunteered at a hospice. Konstantin Markarov had the same look in his eyes of the soldiers brought back from the war. He had done something horrid and needed a chance to confess. I would not rob him of that right. What have you done, Dr. Markarov? A sharp wind drowned out the children below. The light started to seep out of the sky. With each moment that passed, the mass of flesh on Markarov's forehead grew more frenzied. The old man's speech came through choked gasps, yet he refused to give up. Parasite. When I worked at the United People's Institute of Science, I was tasked with the study of a parasite found in the nearby steppe. Profoundly fascinating organism capable of communication with other members of its species across the world. Indestructible, highly intelligent, physically decentralized. The more the organism grew, The closer it was to its descendants, the more dangerous it became. Yet, the scientific potential of this organism was limitless. I kept on telling myself all that was needed was more research. I kept on telling myself that the parasite's potential could be harnessed for the good of humanity. The pursuit of knowledge blinded me. It made me skip safety protocols. It made me reckless with my own flesh. The Soviets were not the only superpower in possession of the parasite. Across the Iron Curtain, a certain Dr. Groves was enlisted by the Americans to study the... We communicated. Markov's entire body had flared up with that red pulse of flesh. Puffs of steam rose like a boiling kettle from beneath his scarf. Take your time, Doctor. Take a deep breath. I'm here to listen without judgment. Tell me what you need to get off your shoulders. With a deep, shivering groan, he continued. Chaos. When the satellite states started to fight for their independence, when the walls started to crumble, there was chaos. Groves and me used this chaos to transport the Western breed of the organism. The Soviet Union was doomed to fail. The People's Institute of Science was doomed to fail. Yet, with the Western breed of the organism, all of that would be irrelevant. The day the package arrived, the day the two halves combined into a greater whole, that was the end of the United People's Institute of Science. That was the day Eleonore was born. For years, research continued under the parasite's leadership. We were making progress. We were gaining valuable information for the good of mankind, but the military, they left us alone for years. But once they realized the power that we held, I sacrificed my body to science. I sacrificed my body to the parasite to keep the Institute safe. The military incursion was taken care of quickly. They stood no match against. They were not prepared. They couldn't be. But my body, the parasite, it refused to give back control. It used me to feed. Above us, the stars painted a chaotic galaxy. The streets had gone silent. It was far too cold to be outside. Even past my thick gloves, I could feel my fingers going numb. Yet I knew that the shaking man in the wheelchair needed to speak. It used me. It used me to hunt, to feed, to grow, to spread. Dr. Markov, you're shaking. It's freezing. Please, let me take you to the clinic. Or, if not that, let me at least take you back downstairs. You're not well. You can leave if you need to, but I cannot go yet. It hasn't happened yet. What hasn't happened? The organism. It grew inside of me. It fed and killed and grew, and when my body could no longer hold it, it spread. Where did it spread to? The old man didn't respond. He simply sighed. The throbbing beneath his flesh was starting to calm. The look of tortured guilt in his eyes simmered down to resigned acceptance. Alexei, do you truly believe in the goodness of mankind? Yes. He sat in silence, his skin growing paler by the second. I guess it doesn't matter anymore. What's done is done. Thank you for all of your help. May you one day find forgiveness in your heart for what I have done. We all make mistakes, Dr. Markov. It's part of being human. Everyone deserves forgiveness. I don't. An explosion cracked the silent night in half. The housing projects lit up in the twin flames of rockets rising from the forest. The projectiles moved with dizzying speed towards the sky. As freezing as it was outside, a flurry of windows opened beneath us to see what was happening. Did those rockets come from the facility? The old man did not respond. He simply watched. Even past the diseased bruising on his face, I could see tears gathering at the edges of his eyes. The parasite spread throughout my body until it could be contained no more. Now it will spread much further. The rockets flew higher and higher, making their incursion on the starry sky. It wasn't until the sound of the thrusters had completely disappeared that they changed their trajectory. Each went in a different direction, drawing a line of white smoke through the black sky, growing smaller and smaller until... poof. 2 tiny, silent explosions in the sky rained down bits of fiery debris all over the earth. Dr. Makarov, is that where the parasite spread? To the rockets? The old man did not reply. He was no longer shivering. His skin was bloodless. Dr. Makarov? His eyes were still dripping tears and looking at the sky, yet the man wasn't breathing. I took off my glove, willed as much warmth into my fingers as I could, and slid them behind the old man's scarf. My fingers were numb, but the lack of a pulse was clear. The old man was dead, yet just as I was about to pull my hand away from his corpse, I felt something. Up through his neck, something moved, something squirmed, something was making its way up towards his jaw. Markov's head dropped to the side, his lips parted, and something horrible slid out. My fingers shook so much that it took me a couple of tries to dial the hospital. When the men finally arrived to retrieve the body, I let them into the apartment complex, but I refused to go with them to the roof. I couldn't stand to look at Konstantin Markov's shell of a body again. It reminded me far too much of what dwelled inside of it. A horrible mess of arteries and blood and muscle. It crawled out of his lips and dragged itself to the edge of the roof. I fear that the thing survived the fall, that it still lingers somewhere in the bushes below, that it is waiting for another victim somewhere in these housing projects. The image of that monstrosity of flesh crawling through the places where the children play haunts me. Yet there is another image which cuts my sanity much more. Somewhere in the stratosphere, 2 giant rockets carrying a horrible load, exploding. The thought of that flesh raining down on our Earth, of Markov's experiment being sown across the planet without warning, that is what truly haunts me. You'd be surprised at what people would leave behind nowadays, and you'd be even more surprised at how much you can make off people's negligence. I make some extra money by purchasing abandoned storage units and flipping the contents inside. Most of the time, you'll find trash like old clothes and busted furniture, but every now and then, there'll be some treasures. Just the other month, I found a box full of old Pokemon cards, and you won't believe how much some of those can go for. As with this whole COVID stuff going on, a lot of storage units have been left abandoned. I went over to another city about an hour away to check out a few units. I'm good friends with the owner of this really old lot, a short plump fellow named Mark, who took over the family business, and he sometimes gives me a heads up when some are available. So I hopped into my truck early one Saturday and made my way over. I met Mark near the entrance, and I followed him towards a small group of people standing in front of one of the units. Now, I'm sure you've seen some shows on TV about stuff like this, and to be honest, it's pretty accurate. About 5 other people are outside of this steel garage door. It's early, we're freezing our asses off, and we're trying to make a quick buck. Mark pops the lock and rolls the door open to reveal what's inside. We're all able to examine the unit from the outside. We can't touch anything unless we buy it. This unit has some cardboard boxes, some decent looking wooden chairs, and a few plastic bags that were completely stuffed. We all quickly glance inside and think if we want to actually bid on this thing or not. My gut was telling me that this was probably going to be a dud, so I passed on it. The next unit had a few good looking golf clubs that I could fetch for a good price, but that wasn't what I was looking for. A couple more units, and I was thinking I probably wasted my morning driving up there. Until we got to the very last unit. When Mark opened up the unit, a blast of dust and stale air bursted out. We all glanced inside. There were a few things that caught my eye, like some old dolls, an old wooden table with chairs, and a huge armoire cabinet. Bingo. That was what got me. A massive thing like that probably held all sorts of stuff. I'll spare you the details of how the bid went with a back and forth of offers. I can assure you that I got the unit and all for $400. I was sure I could make my money back and then some. It was around noon when I left the group to check out the unit I'd bought. I opened the doors and started to sift through the small stuff before hitting the bigger things. There were a few things like some plates and silverware that I could sell pretty well, a bag full of really old business suits, and some broken appliances. So far, it wasn't a huge loss, but my eyes were on the armoire. It was a beautiful piece that stood over 6.5 feet tall. It was dark brown, like looking into a forest as the sun went down. It was made of what looked like different types of wood. This was a good sign. It means that this was definitely an antique. There were no signs of any manufacturer label. This was probably handmade. Definitely handmade, with very minor asymmetrical points. I placed my hands on the handles of the door and pulled. My heart was racing with anticipation. The wood groaned lightly as I opened the armoire doors, like someone awakening from a deep slumber. I looked inside to find a rack with a long sheer white dress inside. I carefully unhooked it, examining the condition that it was in. It was a lovely dress that would have accentuated a stunning woman. I placed it back where it came from and began to rummage through the drawers. The top drawer was empty. My chest tightened as I thought of the money I probably lost on this unit. Opening the drawer felt like opening the lid to a crypt. I had to use a little more strength to remove it from its holding. Jackpot. Inside of the drawer was an ornate wooden jewelry box. Oh, it was a beautiful thing to behold. It was a little bit bigger than a shoebox, with an intricate carving of a field of flowers on top of it. On the side of the jewelry box, there were more carvings of small rabbits playing on a field of flowers. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but the craftsmanship was truly astounding. Such detail in the animals made them look so lifelike. I lifted the box out ever so carefully from the drawer and placed it on a tarp that I had placed earlier. It was unlocked, so I slowly opened its lid to find a diamond ring affixed to a gleaming golden band. You know how in cartoons when a character opens that treasure and they are covered in an angelic light? That's exactly how it seemed to me. I jumped up and let out a yes! This ring could easily sell for thousands. After a few minutes of patting myself on the back, I realized that that was just the tip of the iceberg. There was more to the jewelry box. I calmed myself and began to open the rest of its doors and panels. I admit, I was a little bit disappointed when I couldn't find anything. I was being a bit greedy. I lifted the box again to examine it closer. That's when I noticed the top part where the jewelry was held was raised a bit. I set my fingernails along the edges of the inside of the box, and I was able to lift the part where the jewelry was held. Inside was a secret compartment with a single cassette inside. I laughed a bit as I grabbed the cassette out from the box. I see antiques all the time, but whenever I see audio cassettes, I'm surprised every single time. It's just so obsolete. At least the old jewelry box and cabinet can still be used. A glint of metal shone in the corner of my eye. Underneath the cassette was a pale silver wedding band. My lucky day. I put it to the side and continued to go through the rest of the unit. It wasn't a bad haul at all with the rings, some vintage-looking business suits, the white dress and the furniture. I was definitely going to be in the positive after selling all of this stuff. I was able to get Mark to come down and help me haul the important stuff into boxes and packed onto the bed of my truck with a promise of a few beers later. Unfortunately, the armoire was way too big for my truck, so I'd have to come back for it. I had spent a few hours that day dealing with the unit, and it was already late in the afternoon. Before I headed out, I thought I'd take a moment to listen to that cassette on my way home. I asked Mark if he would happen to have a cassette player lying around somewhere. He grinned, and sure enough, he had a few stowed away. Quote, just in case. I wish I could have been more appreciative, but he charged me $15 for one. Convenience fee, he said with a cheeky smile. Asshole. I hopped into my truck and made my way back home, thinking about my contacts that could assist in flipping this stuff. While I was at a stoplight, I popped the cassette into the player, making sure it was rewound, and pressed play. The tape began to whir and clicked to play. I couldn't hear a thing. Maybe it was just an empty tape. Eventually, my brain switched to autopilot and my body began to go through the motion of driving itself home, my mind completely blanking out. That was when I started to hear something. It was a faint whisper right behind my skull. The voice was so light that it was almost drowned out by the sound of my truck's engine. Drive off. I kept my eyes on the road and felt my hands ever so slightly veer to the right. My truck took a dip as it began to go off the road and onto the grass and dirt. I let out a surprised gasp as I quickly straightened the wheel back towards the road. My shoulders stiffened and a bead of sweat rolled down my forehead. What the hell was that? I slowed down and pulled safely onto the side of the road. I opened the car door and... when did it get so dark? I looked at my phone to see that the hour drive home had turned to 3. Where the hell am I? I took a moment to gather myself and to make sure everything was okay in the bed of my truck. I sat back down onto the driver's seat and pulled up the GPS on my phone. Not only did I not head home, I turned around in the opposite direction. I squeezed the bridge of my nose and rubbed my temples. I thought that I was just tired or something. Yeah, just tired from a long day. I turned the keys in the ignition and my truck cranked to life. I set the directions onto my phone and continued my attempt to return home. I felt my stomach twist inside of me. I hadn't eaten anything all day. I wanted to hurry and get home already. The roads were completely empty, so I stepped on the gas a bit, accelerating in a desperate attempt to shorten the trip. I stared forward, and that was when I heard that something again. I held my breath so I could focus on the noise. Faster. Faster. It was as if an icy dagger had run down my spine as I heard those words. It sounded like a young woman's voice, but in so much pain, so much sadness in her tone. I tried to lift my feet off the gas pedal. I wanted to slow down and be more careful after hearing that. Maybe it was just some intrusive thoughts popping into my skull. My brain tried to tell me to ease up on the gas, but I couldn't. My feet began to sink lower onto the pedal. 65, 72, 78. The number on my speedometer was climbing higher and higher. I couldn't move my foot off the gas. 83, 88, 94. My truck's engine was revving up. The sound of it was blaring in my ears. The boxes in the bed of my truck began to shift and move around. I glanced into my rearview mirror to see one of the boxes. The top flaps of it were beginning to move up. All the boxes were securely taped down, but something inside of it was pushing its way out. That was when the top of the box flew open, and all I could do was stare with my jaw dropped to the floor as something grabbed a hold of the edge of the box to lift itself out. 98, 102, 107. The shape was illuminated by dim beams of moonlight. I saw thin fingers, white and long, on the edge of the box. The head came next, black tousled hair that hung down forever. The neck was shown next, deep and purple grooves indented into pale grey skin as if a snake had wrapped itself around them. Then the torso came to reveal a beautiful sheer white dress that fit tightly on her figure to show every line and curve that she had. The same dress I had found and packed up inside of that box. The woman stood up. My truck was going faster and faster, but she stood impossibly still, aside from her hair that was now flowing behind her. When I saw her face, that was when I lost it. I wanted to cry, scream and vomit all at the same time. Her face was a deep purple and swollen, and the skin was cracked, tearing. Her eyes were completely red, with one of her eyes hanging by a fleshy thread out of its socket, while the other one throbbed. Dark brown bile was running down the corners of her mouth and onto the white dress. Die, die, die. Those words came out clear as day. I looked back onto the road, and I could feel myself slowly lose control of the steering wheel. I continued to try and lift my foot from the pedal, but it was as if it sprouted claws and was digging itself into my foot. I couldn't do anything. All I could do was keep my damn wheel steady on the road. I turned back to look to my rearview mirror, and the woman was gone. I was fully convinced I was going crazy. Then those thoughts shifted to the idea of me dying as I heard something thump above me. I looked forward again to see those fingers on the edge of my glass. She was clambering above me. Her face, upside down, was now peering at me, her mouth open, and those words croaked out of her crushed throat. Die, die, die. The dark brown fluid was pouring out of her mouth and onto my glass, obscuring any other vision I had. Spiderwebbed cracks began to form in front of me. This thing was smashing its head to get to me. A noise finally came out of my mouth, a mix of fear and awe. Moments later, her head came crashing in as her mouth clenched onto the steering wheel. I felt the car jerk towards the right, and I felt an impact. I braced myself for death. Then the airbag deployed and smashed into my face. It all happened so damn fast. I groggily opened my eyes, and my body was aching. I coughed, and it made my head feel like it was going to burst. That was when I noticed my truck was completely flipped over, and I was upside down. The blood that rushed to my head made me feel nauseous. I snapped back to reality as my eyes began to frantically dart around. Where did that woman go? The night was dead silent. I tried to free myself, but I was too weak. A click noise echoed throughout the air beside me, and I looked over towards the cassette player. I don't know why, but as I looked at the cassette rolling inside the clear plastic panel, I felt sadness and fear, like it was the end of the world. A man's voice emerged from the player. It was smooth and deep, and almost comforting. Hey, Bunny. Sorry it's been so long. Work's been really laying into me lately, but I promise I'll make it up to you. Just let me know, and I'll get you whatever you want, okay? I'm sorry about the way I acted the other night. I hope you can forgive me. It's just, you were questioning me every damn day with where am I going and who was I with? Look, let's just let this fall under the bridge, alright? I'll be home tomorrow night. I love you, Bunny. As soon as the machine clicked off, well, it was lights out for me too, apparently. The rest of the events are broken in my head. Fragments of memories, like someone on the phone, an ambulance coming, my body on a stiff bed, to me lying in the hospital, all wrapped up like a mummy. The first things that came out of my mouth were food and where's my stuff? The things that came from the unit were still intact and were in safe keeping. Some time had passed, and I can still see that woman wherever I go, creeping around corners behind me in the reflection, and at the foot of my bed. I hadn't told a soul about what happened that night until it was brought up by my therapist. Yeah, I was still fully convinced that I had some kind of breakdown, until he finally got me to talk about it. It was just so vivid. The woman, her face, her scarred throat. I finally pulled out the cassette player and played the audio again to hear that man's voice. So, I did some digging. It took a while, but I finally had a lead. Surprisingly, Bunny is not an uncommon name like you would think, so that was a bust. Then I remembered Mark. A few drinks in and he let me into his files to look up records on who owned the unit last. So one thing led to another, and I found her name, Martha Bailey. That name eventually led to an address. As soon as I got my info, I gathered the rings, the dress, the cassette, and the jewelry box and headed over as quickly as possible. I followed the GPS towards my destination, and I wanted to cry as fear washed over my body. Even though it was daylight now, I realized I was passing the area where I had crashed. Was I being led back to this address that night? An hour or so had passed, and I parked in front of an old house that was probably built in the 70s. I grabbed the stuff and hurriedly ran to the front door. I didn't know what I was expecting. I just felt like I had to be here or something. I knocked on the door with my arms full of stuff, looking like a lunatic. The door slowly creaked open, and through a crack I could see inside the home was an elderly woman. She looked at me with wide eyes. I couldn't blame her. She asked me what I was doing, so I explained to her a bit of what happened. I bought a unit recently. There were some things in there that I thought would be valuable to Martha Bailey. When she saw what I was holding, I saw a lip quiver and a tear roll down her face. She told me that her mother owned that unit, but dropped off those things because they belonged to her sister, and she didn't dare part with them. Her frail hand clutched at her chest as she stood there and told me what happened to her sister, Barbara Bailey, aka Bunny. She was married to a man who said he loved her and would give her anything she wanted. On the outside, you'd think they were the perfect couple, but that was far from the truth. Apparently, the man had been abusive, cheated on her every chance he would get. Well, she finally confronted him about it, but he was mostly unfazed. He had money, lots of it, and if he were to leave, she would be left with absolutely nothing aside from embarrassment and heartbreak. So Barbara, Bunny, she took it upon herself to end things one night. The man was on his way home to patch things up, like he normally did, but she had enough. She wrapped a rope around her neck. The old woman burst into tears as she slammed the door in my face. I could hear her wails of pain beyond the threshold of the piece of wood between us. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back to the unit and dropped the stuff back, everything back to where it was, and slammed that garage door shut. The first time I saw the creature was 2 days ago, on my way into work. It was early morning, around 6 a.m, and I was driving down the street when I saw the strangest looking snowman I'd ever laid eyes on. It was taller than an ordinary snowman, made of 4 large round boulders of ice instead of the usual 3. It had extra arms as well. 6 sticks came off from his thorax like giant insect legs. 3 sticks on each side, crooked and knobby. 2 more branches were protruding from his face, like warped misshapen mandibles. It had a wicked grin with sharp teeth made of jagged, broken stones. Wow, what kind of creepy-ass latchkey kids builds a snowman like that? I asked myself aloud, picturing Calvin from Calvin and the Hobbes and his demented snowman escapades. Only, this was not funny. It was highly disturbing for some reason I couldn't put my finger on. The effect was terrifying, like a giant insectile snow alien, a totem of ice made for a malevolent frozen god. And worse yet, its gaze seemed to follow me as I drove past in the low light of the morning. Surely just my imagination, I told myself. Tired eyes and not enough sleep. But still, I glanced in the mirror and saw its head was turned in my direction, when I had been certain it had been facing the other way before. I shuddered involuntarily and continued driving, feeling like a dark cloud was following me for the rest of the day. On the way home later, I was pleasantly surprised to see the snowman had been taken down. I realized I'd been holding my breath as I turned into the street I lived on, oddly afraid as I approached the house where the snow creature had been constructed. Maybe the kids' parents found the thing as creepy as I did, I thought to myself. Either way, I was glad to see it gone. Continuing down the street to my house, I backed into my driveway, then looked up and froze when I saw the exact same snowman was now on my neighbour's front lawn across the street. Its head turned so it was looking straight at me. Its extra legs and arms appeared to be waving in the strong winds, making it look animated and alive. I got out of the car, eyeing the snowman across the road suspiciously. "Hey, Jordan," said a Weasley voice to my left as I set my feet down on the slick driveway. Caught off guard, I slipped on the black ice. After pinwheeling and sliding for a few scary moments, I recovered my balance by grabbing onto the hood of the car with both hands. Turning, I looked to see my neighbour, Bill, was standing there on a ladder, putting up Christmas lights and eyeing me strangely. I realised I'd made a high-pitched yelp of fear when he had spoken, right before my awkward little dance on the ice. "You alright?" "Fine," I said. "Just surprised me, that's all." He laughed as if that was the funniest thing in the world. "Quite a show last night," he said, his words punctuated by the punch of his staple gun into the wood beneath the eaves. "Once in a lifetime, if you ask me." "Huh?" I said, confused. "What show?" He laughed again. "The Northern Lights? Didn't you see them? Better than a movie, man, I'll tell you. They say that sort of thing doesn't come along very often, not this far south." "Had to get to bed early for work. Must have missed it." He whistled softly. "Oh, that's a tragedy. You won't get a chance like that again. Once in a lifetime. They said so on the local news this morning." I'd always found Bill's voice to be slightly annoying, like a weasel or a field rodent of some kind, although it did match his facial features and mannerisms. He moved quickly and constantly, jumping from project to project as if he didn't have any real job, just housework. His Christmas decorations were already the nicest on the street, and yet he was still putting more lights up. Meanwhile, we'd been too busy to even put up a wreath or a Christmas tree. He had a giant snowblower parked just inside his open garage, which I loathed with a passion. He was out every morning at 6 a.m. using it, even on weekends. His driveway and sidewalk were always immaculate and free of snow. Ours was usually the opposite of that. "Hey, Bill, do you see that snowman across the street?" I asked. He turned on the ladder just slightly to look over his shoulder, then went back to stapling. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "Yeah, it's a snowman. So? I could have sworn..." I stopped myself, realizing how crazy it all would sound. "What?" "Nothing. Just had a long day. I must be imagining things. I'll talk to you later, Bill." I began walking inside and he called after me. "Oh, by the way, don't forget to shovel the walkway on your side. I saw a bylaw officer out earlier. Wouldn't want you to get another ticket like last week." "Sure. Thanks, Bill," I said, trying to maintain my composure. He'd probably called them himself. After a 12-hour shift, the last thing I wanted to do was go back outside in the cold and shovel the icy walkway under his scrutinizing gaze. Bill always acted friendly, but it was well known he resented most of the neighbours for various reasons and relentlessly gossiped about everyone. I went inside and found my wife was laying down in bed with a headache. She had left a note out saying she wasn't feeling well and I'd have to make my own dinner. After popping a frozen pizza in the oven, I went out to shovel the sidewalk, spreading salt on the driveway so it would hopefully melt by morning. As I looked up from my work, I couldn't help but notice the snowman again. And it was closer this time. Yes, it almost certainly was. Almost at the street now, as if approaching me very softly. I shook my head and finished with shoveling, then returned to the warmth of the indoors. My pizza had been forgotten, and the house was beginning to fill with greyish smoke and the charcoal smell of cheap burnt pizza dough. After airing out the house, I made a can of beans and toast and went to bed, feeling slightly hungry, my mind running through a strange idea over and over again. The thought seemed ludicrous, far-fetched and bizarre, and yet I couldn't stop circling it. My dreams that night were terrible, but I forgot almost everything the second I woke up, being left only with the unease of knowing I'd been chased in my sleep by something cold and evil, with too many legs and beady black eyes. For 8 hours, I relentlessly slumbered and fought a demon in my dreams, and so when I rolled out of bed, I was still exhausted and my eyes refused to stay open without a concerted effort. Coffee helped, as it always did, and I ventured out into cold darkness and scraped off the car for my morning drive to work. Suddenly, I was shocked wide awake when I looked up to see the reflection of the snowman creature from across the street, standing right behind me. My heartbeat was suddenly hammering hard in my chest, and I actually dropped the ice scraper from my hand. I turned around and saw the thing had been standing just inches away. Certain that it had not been there a few moments before, I began to feel shaky and sick with fear. Getting into my car without turning around, I gunned the engine, not wanting to break eye contact with the snowman. The black charcoal eyes stared back at me as the engine began to rev, and I drove away, unsure what else to do. Would anyone believe me if I told them? Driving down the street, my rational mind began to make up excuses instantly. You were so tired, you just didn't see it in the dark, my brain told me. Snowmen don't move themselves, it's just the local college kids moving it around, playing pranks on the neighbours. Living snowmen, that's ridiculous. These things don't happen in real life. The day passed quickly while I was at work. We were so busy that I didn't even think about the snowman for most of the day, until I was leaving and getting in my car to drive home. I had fully convinced myself at that point it was all just the kids playing pranks, that I'd just been tired and hadn't noticed they moved the snowman into the divide between my house and Bill's. We live in the semi-houses that are connected together in the middle, so we share this small, narrow lawn between our driveways. I pulled up to our house, the evening light now completely gone and replaced by the darkness of night. My stomach was rumbling with hunger after a long day at work, and I began to park. Then I stopped in my tracks. The snowman had moved again. Now it was right in the driveway, blocking it so I couldn't park. It's just college kids, I told myself, and parked on the street instead. I walked back to the house, feeling uneasy as the snowman glared at me, appraising me as I came closer. The creature's head was lowered like a bull about to charge, and I could barely make out its eyes looking right at me from beneath its brow, hateful and staring. The effect was terrifying, making him look demonic and malicious somehow. Something else caught my eye. For the first time I'd ever seen, Bill's driveway was not perfectly cleared of snow. His sidewalk likewise had a few inches piled up on it. This was very strange, considering how meticulous he was with his household upkeep. There was also something else too. His garage door was slightly ajar and the light was on inside. There was a sound coming from the interior that I didn't like one bit. It was like the sound my cat made when eating wet food, sloppy, snarfing and dribbling. I couldn't help it. Despite my fear, I was overwhelmed with curiosity and needed to see what was making that horrible noise. It sounded large and inhuman, and I needed to know for certain if my suspicions were correct. Walking past the hideous snowman, I pulled open the garage door and gasped, horrified at what had been revealed behind it. The usually well-kept garage was in disarray. Shovels, axes and saws had been knocked from their organised places and were strewn everywhere. Bags of salt and soil had been spilled, and the light bulb hanging from the ceiling was off its axis, crooked and flickering. And at the centre of all of this was Bill. Or at least what remained of him. He had been eviscerated and disemboweled, the top half of his body now completely separated from the legs, his torso a cavity of mangled flesh and ruined organs. Surrounding Bill were several of the snow creatures, now horizontal and standing on all 6 legs like giant insects. They were feasting on his viscera and vital organs. They acted like a pack of wolves, tearing him apart and rending flesh from bone, snapping at one another greedily as they fought over the choicest morsels. I saw Bill's eyes were still open, and he was blinking, somehow alive despite all of this, his mouth making soft bubbling, gurgling sounds as blood poured out from between his lips. Then there was a soft crunching noise behind me, and I spun around to see the other snowman creature from outside. It was crawling up behind me like a giant spider, creeping so quietly across the snow I had barely heard it. It saw me and hissed a warning to the others, who likewise turned and hissed like cats. They began to skitter across the cement floor towards me, as the other one did the same, even closer to striking. Terrified, I searched the nearby space for a weapon. A snow shovel caught my eye, and I grabbed it and spun with it in my hand. It made contact with the face of the creature just as it was leaping at my midsection with its branch-like arms outstretched. The feeling was like taking a swing at a brick wall, and the handle rattled and vibrated in my hand painfully after the impact. But it seemed to do the trick. The creature's teeth were crooked and its head deformed from the blow, and it made a noise like an injured dog as it retreated and ran from the house. The other 3 creatures were momentarily stunned by my attack on their lookout, but they regained their composure quickly, seeing I was outnumbered. They raced toward me and panicked, throwing the shovel at the one in front like a javelin. The blade of the shovel cut through the creature's face like a knife through butter, exposing its Eleanoid brain matter. A fountain of green blood began to splurt like a geyser from its exposed brainstem, and it crumpled dead to the floor. 2 of them were left, but I was without a weapon now, and they sensed their opportunity. They moved towards me, and I only had a few moments to think of a way to respond. They were far too quick to outrun. I'd never make it to my house or my car. Then the snowblower caught my eye. I remembered when Bill had bought the damn noisy thing. He'd bragged about it for months, showing off its features to anyone who would listen. He was particularly fond of the push-button start mechanism. "No more pulling a starter cord over and over in the freezing weather, Jordan. This baby is top of the line," he told me one day excitedly, demonstrating it for me. With no other options, I grabbed it quickly and pulled out the choke, then tipped it over and hit the green start button just as the creatures dove at me, their jaws wide open and dripping with blood. I wedged my feet between the base and lifted the snowblower up a few feet into the air with all my effort. The creatures had never encountered anything like a snowblower, I guess, since it caught them completely off guard. One of them jumped right into it, sending green blood jetting from the top of the machine and spraying it all over me and the ceiling above. I was left with just one of the creatures, who no longer seemed to like the odds, after having seen me murder 3 of its friends. It escaped out the garage door, and I was left alone in the cold, breathing heavily and feeling utterly exhausted. Bill took one last shuddering breath himself and was completely still after that. I stumbled out of the garage, feeling like I'd fallen into another world. I looked around and saw I was alone. Trembling from fear and shaking from the cold, I was about to pull out my phone to call the police. But then I heard the soft crunching sound again. This time, not just from one place, but from all around. Following the sounds, I looked around to see not one, but dozens of the snowman creatures coming from all around, from every direction, drawn in by the calls of their injured comrades. They flooded the street. My house was blocked by one of them, and more moved in from the other side. But the way to my car was still clear. I ran to it as fast as I could, opening the door and climbing inside quickly. I started it and peeled out of the parking spot, just as they surrounded my car and began to hammer on the windows, their branch arms squealing and scraping across the glass. Fleeing the neighborhood, I got to a safe spot and called my wife. There was no answer. The local police weren't picking up either. I'm trying to sort out my thoughts now, trying to figure out what to do next, but it seems like no matter what I do, the outcome will be the same. These things multiply too fast. They're too strong and too quick. I hope my wife is okay. I'm building up the courage to go back and try find her. I wish more than anything I'd stay to fight, just so I would know she's alright, and so that I could give her this message. Christine, if you're hearing this, Bill said we can borrow his snowblower.